And welcome back, everyone. My apologies for being pretty much close to 70 minutes past start time. That is not ideal, and most days wouldn't be acceptable. But today, I had a lot to do, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't starving during the show or ill-prepared. So it's better to be prepared. It's better to be at full capacity than be all over the place. But yeah. Start right when we're supposed to, especially during the preseason. But anyway, we have a lot to talk about today, over 11 different topics, some previews, Michigan and USC in that department. I want to ask some questions regarding Indiana, answer some questions regarding Oregon. We got a lot of better or worse and bold predictions type videos because for the first part of July, we didn't really go live all that much, and I plan to space them out. But now I want to get through the hypotheticals, the questions about whether Ohio State's going to improve or regress, or a team like LSU or Oklahoma will. But I'd also like to take a look at the Michigan State Spartans, who have a new head coach in Pat Fitzgerald, and there are different questions about whether or not they are going to improve or regress. It's interesting. You think that with Lane Kiffin and LSU, and to a much lesser degree Pat Fitzgerald and Michigan State, they're just guaranteed to improve, and yet they, especially with Michigan State's situation, I think LSU probably 98% confidence they'll improve. Michigan State may not. What about Oklahoma? Oklahoma returns a lot. Ohio State is the program, but Ohio State also loses a lot, and Oklahoma was on the winning side of the law of close games, which long-term followers of this channel will know. If you are a winner in close games the previous season, the law of close games says most likely, more likely than not, you are going to win a lower percentage of your close games. So if you don't rapidly improve as a team, you're going to have a worse record. Case in point being Illinois last year. But we have so much to talk about in a limited amount of time. I'm really excited. So before we get started, everyone, please make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit that notification bell, make sure to be active in the live chat. Something I loved about last live show is that so many people were active in the live chat. I do not want that show where we had a very large portion of concurrent viewers and we had a lot of activity. I do not want that to be the exception. I want that to be the norm as this channel chases excellence, no matter how imperfect or how close to perfection it is. We're never going to be perfect, and you are or in the case of me and my contractors, you are our greatest ally here. You truly are. Your watch hours, your dedication, your attention, your support, that helps us go. So I know not everyone's going to, not everyone's going to enjoy our stuff, and that's okay. We're not for everyone, and everyone's not for us. That's how the world works. That's how business works. But if you do love the show and you are wanting to help us out, engage, watch all the way through. Subscribe if you haven't already, because doing all those things helps pay the bills. It helps this channel grow, and the more we grow, the more we'll be able to cover. That's the neat thing about this. If you support this channel, that enables us to cover more of the sport and give you even more football knowledge. But let's kick this off by discussing Michigan and USC, previewing them. Both of these teams went 9-4 last year. Both of these teams, I believe, are in a similar boat when looking at their positions entering 2026. One has a new head coach. The other has a coach that has been familiar with that program for several years, but they seemingly are chasing a new identity, I guess is the best way to put it. But we'll start with Michigan, go to USC, and then get to some of those questions and get to some of those bold predictions. We have so many bold predictions, one of which involves two of the top Big Ten teams playing each other 3 times. Another involves one of USC or Michigan winning the freaking national title. Some wild but exciting stuff that I'm pumped to talk about. Absolutely pumped to talk about. Michigan enters 2026 as one of the most fascinating teams in college football. Michigan enters 2026 with one of the most fascinating teams in college football. Let's look at the 2026 Michigan football roster, including Bryce Underwood, Kyle Whittingham's impact, going from maybe the worst staff in the Power Four to one of the best, Michigan's schedule, and whether Michigan has what it takes or not to compete for the Big Ten championship and the college football playoff. And I will give a record prediction for Michigan at the end of the video. So Michigan last season went 9-4, but a very empty calorie 9-4, 7-2 in Big Ten play. They lost to USC in a blowout fashion, lost to Oklahoma by 2 scores, a game that was close in some regards, but Michigan could never make the key plays to catch up. Oklahoma was clearly better, and they had matchup advantages with how young Underwood was, and Michigan dropped some picks and just didn't play all that well. Ohio State crushed them in their own house, and Texas was able to pull away in the fourth quarter in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, which was Michigan's 4th loss. Michigan's biggest win of the year in 2025 was against Washington, a Washington team that finished 9-4, was power rated top 25. They beat them 24-7. That game was tied, though, 7-7 late in the third. It was not a clean game either. Despite Michigan's consistent recruiting success under Sharon Moore, despite there being talent on the Wolverines roster, and despite Michigan's history before Sharon Moore under Jim Harbaugh, before Rich Rod and Brady Hoke, Lloyd Carr, Gary Moeller, Bo Schembechler, Michigan in the 21st century in the past 2 years has really been a disappointment in a lot of ways. I wonder how much of that was due to poor decisions and bad coaching more than just something inherent about Michigan. I think a lot had to do with that. When Michigan is up, as you saw 3 years ago in 2023 and then 2022 and 2021, they can punch with Ohio State. They can punch with Alabama. They can punch with Georgia. Well, maybe not in 2021, but you get the point. Michigan is a program and a team with a very high ceiling. The question year to year is, does Michigan play to that ceiling? That's the biggest question. It's talent management, talent development, and what better of a staff to get after the disaster that was Sharon Moore, Wink Martindale, Chip Lindsey, Kurt Campbell. What better of a staff to have come into the building than Kyle Whittingham, Jason Beck, and Jay Hill, with a top 10 roster in terms of team talent composite. And even under Sharon Moore, Michigan went 17-9. They won pretty much 2 out of every 3 of their games, with some tough games mixed in there. The talent is there. Coaching and development and beating your rival and overachieving, that's the question with Michigan. It's not about what they have on hand. Last season, again, they had a wreck of a coaching staff, a wreck of a team. You saw against Purdue or against Nebraska, even against Washington, against Michigan State, in the 3 big losses. There were procedural errors. There were missed assignments. There was inconsistent performance. Underwood had a phenomenal day against the Washington Huskies, which fielded a good defense, much better defense than USC, I might add. Had a phenomenal day against them. The week before that against USC, he was turning the football over, wasn't playing that well, didn't look all that right in the head. Against Oklahoma, he really struggled. And then while struggling in the passing department against Nebraska, he really tore them up on the ground. Defensively, Michigan went from sometimes dominating the lines of scrimmage to being dominated, and it was the same with Michigan's offensive line. It was a very Jekyll and Hyde, inconsistent team last season, with an empty calorie schedule, an empty calorie resume, winning the games where talent could carry them and losing the games where they needed coaching in addition to talent to win those games. Michigan had an above-average offense, an above-average defense. The only elite part of the team was when the running backs were healthy, Jordan Marshall and Justice Haynes. And outside of that, special teams sucked. The tackling was inconsistent. The receivers were still dropping passes. And every position except for running back was extremely up and down. very much like a heart rate monitor when someone's having a heart attack. Watching Michigan, if you were a fan last year, or if you were an analyst who wanted to see them put things together, just from a talent perspective, you would be yelling at the TV with how inconsistent and up and down that roster and program were. You can't have that in 2026 with this schedule. You just can't do it. Why can't Michigan be inconsistent, Sam? Why could they afford to be inconsistent last year? Why were you giving the team grace last year and not this year? Well, for the same reason that perception will give Michigan no grace this year, because the schedule's tougher. A lot of people, Josh Pate talks about this often, a lot of people get stuck in the "you are what your record says you are" train of thought. I don't, but a lot of people do. The College Football Playoff Committee gets stuck in all caps, period, in that train of thought. Last season, Michigan could have gotten in at 10-2. Not even by beating Ohio State. They could have beaten an Oklahoma team who wasn't even really top 15 at the end of the year, or a USC team who was very questionable. They could have lost to the only top 10 team on their schedule. A very empty calorie 10-2 season, not as empty calorie as 9-3, and with a 10-2 record in their brand, they would have gotten in. This Michigan team in 2026 could be 10 to 14 points better than last year's Michigan team, a massive improvement, and have the same record or lose an additional game, because the schedule is not just Western Michigan, UTEP, Iowa, Minnesota, a rebuilding Penn State team, Rutgers, UCLA, Michigan State, and maybe say you add in Maryland or you play Nebraska at home. No, you got to play Indiana and Oregon in addition to Ohio State. And Ohio State and Oregon are on the road. And UCLA should be improved. Rutgers has KJ Duff and Antoine Raymond, 1,000-yard receiver and running back. Michigan State should at least be mentally tougher, you would hope, under Pat Fitzgerald. Minnesota returns everyone, their top 5 in returning production. Iowa is going to be formidable on the lines of scrimmage. This is a schedule that will provide and show no mercy to the Michigan Wolverines this year. Absolutely no mercy. It is also a schedule ripe with opportunity. If Michigan plays to its potential here, you are probably looking at 9-3 at the very worst, and 10-2, maybe 11-1 at the best. With some of the issues and still some of the inexperience and youth in parts of this roster, and playing Oregon and Ohio State on the road, and Indiana having the best coaching staff, you're not going to win all 3 of those games. Michigan, probably, barring something crazy, will not go undefeated. It may not even be in the cards there. But if Kyle Whittingham and Jason Beck and Jay Hill are able to utilize these players and bring them forward, and they get some key players such as John Henry Daly and Rod Moore back healthy on offense, Jordan Marshall healthy, if Savion Hyder hits it off, if Bryce Underwood makes a big leap, Michigan can earn several big wins on this schedule, in addition to beating several competent foes who they should expect to beat. This starting lineup is talented. It is capable of taking on the pressure and the tasks that this schedule asks you to complete, the teams this schedule asks you to face. Underwood has, in theory and on paper, based on his high school tape and how bad the situation was at Michigan last year, he has limitless upside. Jordan Marshall is a similar caliber player, more so Savion Hyder behind him. Andrew Marsh is a future NFL wide receiver. Jamie French, J.J. Buchanan, guys who were good out of high school or played well last season as true freshmen. French was highly touted out of high school. Buchanan got a few hundred receiving yards at Utah as a hybrid receiver and tight end. Zach Marshall is a talented player at the tight end position. Blake Frazier, Evan Link, Jake Guanera, Nathan Ifabi, and Andrew Sprague. That's your projected starting 5 in the offensive line. But pay attention to Andrew Babalola, who was likely going to start or at least compete for a starting role at tackle before suffering a season-ending injury last season. If he's healthy, he, along with Sprague, have the physical tools and build where if they're coached up by Jim Harding this year, as I'd expect them to be, Michigan could contend for having one of the best tackle duos in all of college football. Defensively, you're looking at a defense that has some questions with how much veteranacy it lost up front. I believe Michigan's two deep from last season, 6, 7, 5 players were seniors. So Michigan loses more than half of their two deep on the D-line last season. They lose 3 out of 4 two deep linebackers. That front seven got pillaged. But John Henry Daly transfers in. Inoue, Trey Pierce, and Cameron Brandt had significant playing time last year, and they return. Linebacker, it's projected that Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng and Troy Bowles will be your starters. And at defensive back, you're looking at Zeke Berry, Yair Hill, Smith Snowden, Chris Bracey, and Rod Moore as your starting 5 in Jay Hill's 4-2-5 defense. Should see some more unique blitz packages, should see a lot more disguised coverages in this scheme compared to Wink Martindale's scheme. Offensively, Michigan should get back to playing more of a physical brand, maybe not being as cute, but a lot of that is just cliche. I would also expect Michigan to possibly use 5 wide a bit here, and maybe not 5 wide per se, but also use one running back, 4 wide receiver. That's what I meant to say. And they could even run out of that, and they have the depth at receiver, at least from 3 to the top 4, to effectively pass out of such a formation, which they just have not had in previous seasons. It's a bit of a new look Michigan football team, if I'm being honest here. It's different from the Jim Harbaugh teams, and Sharon Moore, while he was 1/zillionth of a coach that Jim Harbaugh was learning from his teacher, learning from his former boss at Michigan what to do. So he imperfectly tried to replicate that in a lot of parts. Whittingham is going to be doing some things differently. Whittingham is a defensive coach. Harbaugh and Sharon Moore were offensive coaches. I know they didn't always, their teams didn't always play like it, but that's what they were. Offensively, this is going to be Jason Beck's system. An RPO spread system that was one of the best rushing attacks, irrespective of the competition they faced in college football. Texas Tech was the only rushing defense to shut them down, and Texas Tech plastered Oregon's rushing offense. They would have held Ohio State to negative rushing yards. Indiana would have had a hard time running on them. Notre Dame would have had a hard time running on them. Texas Tech had one of the nation's best rushing defenses. Utah was still able to have some success in limiting TFLs and even got a rushing touchdown against those guys in the regular season. I do not believe, nor am I saying that Michigan will have the best offense in the country, but it is going to be so improved from last season's offense that it will be night and day. Utah was 4th in yards per carry last year. They had 2 first-round picks in the offensive line, so they did have an offensive line talent edge compared to their competition that I don't know if Michigan will have, though Michigan's O-line in theory should be as good as Michigan's or Utah's last year, maybe better. What I do know that Michigan has that was better than what Utah had last year was potential at the quarterback position. Bryce Underwood has a higher ceiling than Devin Dampier. Devin Dampier inherently is not an awesome passer. He's an awesome runner, just an above-average good passer. With Michigan's development and coaching, I would imagine that you will see better passing and better throwing of the football with this Michigan team than last year's Utah team. And if you're a Michigan fan, player, or coach, you should hope so, because the competition, again, is going to be much tougher. Receiver or tight end is probably the weakness of this team here. Sure, there are criticisms of Bryce Underwood, and it's imperative that he improves, but given he is one of the most talented players in the field and the coaching that this staff will provide, I think there should at least be improvement expected there. This offense is good enough where there are weak spots, and there are spots that in big games will absolutely be weaknesses, but there isn't really a weakness if you are grading Michigan based on the average FBS team, which is how I usually grade teams. Michigan has a top 10, if not top 5 rushing offense. They will have a top 25 passing offense in terms of what they want to do, in terms of their efficiency. And the offensive line has all the talent in the world, and they finally have an elite offensive line coach to pair with it. I'm very, very bullish on this offense. Defensively, it's a bit different because of, I guess you could say, the defense. I have concerns about the middle of the field. And how you win in college football is you dominate the middle of the field. That's what made Ohio State's defense last season so elite, when in terms of raw pass rush from their defensive ends, they were productive, but they did not have NFL defensive ends last season. It's why Kenyatta Jackson came back. It's why Caden Curry was a day 3 pick. But they dominated the middle of the field. Their safeties, McLean and Downs, were elite. Sonny Styles and Reese were generational. And McDonald was the best defensive tackle by a mile. And while he was on the field inconsistently because he's more of a plug D tackle than an every down D tackle, when he was on the field, you felt it. And the odds that you were going to have a successful play in success rate were so much lower when he was on that field. At Michigan is almost the inverse of that plan. Their corners look fantastic with Hill and with Smith Snowden, and if Zeke Berry's able to play to his potential with his talent. John Henry Daly could very easily lead the Big Ten in sacks this year. He could be the Big Ten's best defensive end besides the 2 guys that Oregon has, and he could even be better than one or even both of them. Michigan has talent with Carter Meadows, with Nate Marshall, with Dominic Nichols, with Cameron Brandt at D-end to have a very deep and lethal edge attack. D-tackle with Eno Etta, Trey Pierce, and some of the younger guys they have also has a fairly high ceiling, but not the same production of D-end. And linebacker behind them, I gave it a B for a reason. It is an average, if not possibly below average, based on production, Power 4 linebacker core. There are several linebacker cores in the ACC or Big 12 that have an argument to be better based on what we know in the preseason. D-line corner is great. Safety is intriguing because I love the talent there and the idea of Michigan safeties being good, but I got to see Rod Moore recover fully before putting him as an All-American, which he was in 2023 and looked the part at times in 2022. Would love to put him there. He will be there if he's totally healthy. I just don't know how you can recover from the last 2 years where it felt like his injury situation was mismanaged. One thing I know for sure due to the discipline and fundamental soundness that Whittingham will bring is special teams will be fixed from where it was last year. And that's the beauty of looking at Michigan and this team here. They have a high-level offensive coordinator and a high-level defensive coordinator and a head coach who's been around the block and has worked under a wonderful head coach in Urban Meyer, who built Utah up again and again as they kept switching conferences and was able to produce multiple 10-win seasons in the conferences that he played in, multiple in the Pac-12, multiple in the Mountain West, and one in the Big 12 despite only being there for 2 seasons. At Michigan, you won't have the same injury or recruiting hit and miss concerns that you do at Utah. Now, your schedules will also be tougher too, but the floor of Whittingham and his year-over-year win-or-loss record should be better. It should be. But the ceiling, I understand some concerns. He's a little bit of an older guy. Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State are well ahead of Michigan, and USC, much like Michigan, is a program with a lot of potential. It's tough. It's very tough in the Big Ten. I do, though, have Whittingham at that, along with his coordinators and staff, at that AA+ group, where you are looking at a top 10 staff here. My friend Baldfather Betts, college football betting expert, has said Michigan inarguably is a top 15 staff in college football. Last season, they had a staff that may have resided certainly outside of the top 60 in the Power 4, one of the worst in the Power 4, possibly outside of the top 100 in FBS, with how poorly they managed things and how distracted Sharon Moore was. So that's a massive upgrade here. With the talent not really dropping off, because the only player I look at from last year's team who left and may have irreplaceable type potential is Justice Haynes, who went to Georgia Tech, and Derek Moore, who got drafted by the Lions. Henry Daly comes in and was more productive than Derek Moore in big spots. And you look at Savion Hyder coming in. He could be a Justice Haynes caliber running back. Could be. Not saying he will be. Michigan is 9th in my power ratings right now. And even if I do lower them, I'm not going to raise them. At the highest, they'll be 9th. I could see them get lowered to being top 15, but not top 10. So 11, 12, 13 is where I could lower them to. Of course, I could also lower them to the 10 spot. They're in that range. They are a college football playoff contender for sure. The question is, can they put together their pieces and beat a big team? Because I would imagine you got to be 10-2, especially factoring in Ohio State could be 9-3. And with the location of the game, 9-3 Ohio State with a head-to-head win over 9-3 Michigan will get in over you. You do not have the preseason rating, the talent, or the opportunity to get a likely head-to-head win over Ohio State and Texas, who are the most likely 9-3 teams to get in. So no one's safe to get into the playoff if they're 9-3. Can you go 10-2? And at that point, you are certainly in the college football playoff. I believe Michigan can go 10-2, but they play 3 teams power rated instead of my top 5. 3 of them. They also play Oklahoma, who's 11th in my power ratings, and Penn State and Iowa are in my top 20. So it's interesting. Michigan should improve. I believe they'll improve handily by several points. This season's team, from a coaching acumen aspect and talent aspect, would match up very well against last season's team and handily beat them. At the same time, I see 9 or 8 wins here, just like last year's team likely was going to get, because the schedule is that much tougher. This is a great team. The biggest weakness here, the only weakness that I see that isn't just a weak link to be improved upon, but will be a liability, is the linebacker position. And that can come up against Indiana, Oregon, Ohio State, and possibly even Oklahoma with their mobile QB. That can be a problem, or even Nico Iamaleava at UCLA. If teams are able to somehow out-scheme Michigan's D-line or scheme out the defensive line, and it comes down to the linebackers and safeties doing their part, that could cause issues for Michigan's defense. And that was something with Utah last season. Not the exact same weakness, but Utah had a susceptibility in the ground game, and particularly against Kansas State and Kansas, who had mobile QBs and explosive running backs. That is an area that I'm keeping my eye on. I believe the pass defense and the pass rush, check. Same with the rushing offense. The passing offense, I think, has a lower ceiling than the run defense, but I strangely enough believe it has a higher floor. Michigan's run defense last year was very, very gettable against a team like USC that had the best rushing offense by a mile that Michigan played last year. And Michigan plays a lot of rushing attacks that will be as good or even better, possibly significantly better, than USC's rushing attack was last year. Quarterback, I'm giving a lot of benefit of the doubt on. Why? Coaching, and Underwood's very talented. He's finally in a real program. Love Michigan's offensive line this year. Love the center position with Jake Guinera in particular in the running back room. Like the D-line. The only concern is linebacker, the health of the safety room, and the team is still young, and Sharon Moore, obviously he developed the roster badly, so it will take time for bad habits to be unlearned. So I'm a little bit concerned about the playable depth of this team, but only a little concerned relative to the schedule Michigan plays. If Michigan played Texas Tech's schedule, they're a high enough quality team where I'd pick them to go 11-1 or 12-0 with that schedule. If they played Notre Dame's schedule, getting Miami at home, playing BYU on the road, I'd safely pick Michigan to go 11-1, 10-2 at the absolute worst, but probably 11-1 just with the staff and with the talent they have. That's how easy Notre Dame's schedule and Texas Tech schedules are. Michigan's is so hard that when I look at them, I honestly see 8-4 or I see 9-3, and right now I have pegged 9-3. Probability says that 8-4 is the most likely record. That's why Vegas has the win total at 8.5, juice to the under. When I look at my model for Michigan, the most likely record is right in between that 8-4, 9-3 area, leaning slightly 8-4. I have Michigan projected at 8.3 and 3.7 right now. So 8.3 wins and 3.7 losses. And Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State will be heavy favorites over them, or significantly better teams, even if the line's a little bit low. Between Oklahoma, Iowa, Minnesota, Penn State, UCLA, Rutgers, Michigan State, basically every game that isn't Western Michigan and UTEP, there is enough room for an upset against Michigan for them to falter and lose that fourth game. Michigan likely isn't going to go 9-3 and beat one of those big three teams while taking a loss to one of those other teams. I know some people have theorized that with Michigan having a new regime and they could start off slow and finish hot, and I do think there's a part of that. However, I do believe that Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana are just well ahead of even a team like Oklahoma, who'd be the fourth best team on Michigan's schedule. And Oklahoma will be a challenge. I have Michigan winning the Oklahoma game, the UTEP and Western Michigan game, obviously, beating Iowa, Minnesota, Penn State, Rutgers, Michigan State, and UCLA, but losing to the big three right now, Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State. There'll be a fringe college football playoff contender. If there aren't enough 10-win teams, Michigan could get in at 9-3, but it is far from a guarantee. I might change the record prediction. It is very chalkish, picking them to lose the games where I have them as an underdog and win the games where they are projected to be a favorite. But given that Michigan isn't as well coached as Indiana, Ohio State, isn't as talented as Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana, I do think that Oregon with Dan Lanning, they also have a better coach than Whittingham. Just wanted to make that clear. The big three have better staffs and better rosters, I believe, when you factor in the development and where they're at in their build than Michigan does. I believe Michigan has a better staff and roster than everyone else they play, though. So when you have a really good coach and a huge coaching edge in 9 of your games, along with a sizable roster edge and home field edge, you're probably going to win most of those games, if not all of them. And when you have that same disadvantage against 3 opponents and 2 of them are on the road, you're probably going to lose those games too. So I would expect 8-4 or 9-3 from this Michigan team. The ceiling is 11-1. That is if everything pans out correctly. Gosh darn it. Did not mean to do that there. The ceiling is 11-1. That's if everything pans out correctly. The floor, if everything goes wrong, I believe is 7-5. Just have enough faith in that coaching staff, or even if a lot goes wrong, they'll still beat some competent teams and finish with a winning record. It cannot get worse than what Sharon Moore was with the Michigan Wolverines. It just can't. In no way is it going to get worse. That went a little bit longer than expected. That's usually how it goes. Holy cow, we have 53 concurrent viewers again. Like the video. Let's get up to 30 likes today, guys. Please subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell. I'm quickly going to turn the fan on me. Not the big fan. If you guys are wearing headphones, you probably think it's quieter. That's because I turned off the huge industrial fan. But I'm starting to get a little bit hot now. So I'm going to take a little bit of a break, move that around, and then we'll talk about USC, and we'll talk about some other topics. So stay tuned, sit back, and relax. I'll be back in like 5 minutes, if not less than that. Just need to get a drink of water and turn that fan to me. All right. Well, I turned the fan on me, got a bit of water. I do feel a little bit better. That was about 5 minutes. So thank you all for waiting around. Thank you for liking the video and for subscribing and just being the best out there. Thanks. So, how do I do this? Because I'm still. This is what stinks about the summer upstairs, and I didn't think about this one a few years ago when I was much younger and not as wise. I moved my studio upstairs. I wanted to do it to get away from my family's barking dog when they still lived here. At the time, it was worth it, but now it's not, because basically whenever it's in the 70s outside, it's in the 80s upstairs. And I mean, you really have to have a day where the humidity's low, where the sun's just not out as long, for anything above like 70 to like not feel warm. But anyway, enough with my rambling, enough with my complaining. It's time to it's time to talk about USC, talk about a little bit what they were last year and really what they're bringing in this year, because much like Michigan, they're one of the most fascinating teams in college football. USC has one of the most talented and oldest rosters in the Big Ten entering 2026. But can Lincoln Riley finally put everything together? I'm going to break down the 2026 USC football roster, schedule, their strengths, weaknesses, and whether the Trojans, as Lincoln Riley says, they're in the championship window, can compete for both the Big Ten championship and national championship this fall. At the end of the video, I will also give a record prediction for USC. USC lost the Alamo Bowl to finish a 9-3, 7-2 Big Ten regular season. USC went 9-4, had a lot of opt-outs in the bowl game. It was kind of a humiliating finish, but in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter. What matters is what USC was last season and what they bring into 2026. That's really what matters. And that is a team that has found its identity on offense after losing it a bit in 2024, and it has improved defensively, but still has a long way to go. USC's problem is not a lack of talent. It is a lack of discipline. It is a lack of fundamentals. It is a lack about caring about defense, which for winning national championships, as Kirby Smart would tell you, as many of these coaches that have won titles would tell you, defense recently has been more important than offense in terms of winning national championships. And USC hasn't even reached a championship level yet. 11-3, 8-5, 7-6, 9-4 is through 4 seasons of the Lincoln Riley era. And entering his 5th season, USC's win total is sitting there at 8.5. With USC's toughest schedule since 2023, when they played 14-1, Washington 12-2, Oregon, who was power rated top 5, when they played a 10-3 Notre Dame team who was power rated top 10. It's a really tough schedule this season. But at some point, you have to win the big game. You have to evolve, and you have to play well on defense. You have to play well and cover the spread or win a decent game on the road. And USC has lacked in those departments, including last season when they lost to Illinois on the road. An Illinois team of the week before could have lost by 70 or even 100 to Indiana if Indiana wanted to rub it in that badly. IU won by 53. An Illinois team that lost by 3 scores or more to Ohio State, to Washington, and to Wisconsin. USC lost to that team. That team was able to run the 2-minute drill using halfback dive with Caden Fagan, who's now a converted tight end, to get down the field and kick the game-winning field goal. So there are issues with this team entering this season, and I don't know how many of them will be fixed, but I imagine with the incoming defensive coordinator, Gary Patterson, and with how much this team returns, there is going to be significant improvement. And while USC has never lacked talent, they've also never had this type of talent in the building with this incoming freshman class, and it sounds like a good chunk of them are going to be immediate contributors. That adds depth, that adds explosiveness, that adds talent. And these are all things that can benefit USC in a big way. The offense, all I need to see from the offense is do a better job of running the ball, particularly on the road, and do a better job protecting your quarterback on the road. A lot of this stems back to just playing better on the road. Their passing attack, their rushing attack at home, their overall method of attack, their play calling was very good last season. I was impressed with what they did on the road against Oregon. I was impressed on a per-play basis with what they did against Notre Dame. They just couldn't punch it in. They couldn't make the impact play when they needed it, but on an overall play-per-play basis, they did well. And offense wasn't the problem against Illinois. It was not even the problem against, say, Iowa, or the problem really, period, outside of maybe the Nebraska game. That defense, though, being outside the top 100 in EPA per rush. So whenever a team handed off the football, they gained more yards per carry and or scored more than models would have predicted them given the field position where they were handing off the football. Basically, handing the football off against USC and their defense was almost always the correct move, unless you were really in an obvious passing down. Notre Dame showed that. Oregon, even with a banged-up O-line, did well enough running the football, and like a really banged-up O-line in that game. Nebraska was able to run the football decently. Michigan was until Justice Haynes went down with an injury. And it's not like USC's passing defense was all that hot either. Oregon, Notre Dame, even Michigan had a big play against them. Illinois lit them up, and Kamari Ramsey really was the only player who went down from that secondary in that game, didn't play due to food poisoning. They had issues last year on defense and special teams. If they can get those things cleaned up with special teams coordinator Mike Eckler, defensive coordinator Gary Patterson, who are experts in their respective fields and great teachers of this, Eckler fixed Nebraska's glaring special teams issues under Rule that had plagued them for longer than the Rule era, and he fixed them in 1 year. I imagine you could see a similar turnaround at USC, and Patterson, with what he wants to do on defense, fits the profile of still being able to have high-flying, quick, explosive offenses paired with good defenses. He had those type of teams at TCU in some of his best seasons. The schedule, again, is very tough. That's why the win total is 8.5. USC thankfully gets a week 0 game because that means they have 2 bye weeks. 2 weeks of extra preparation and extra rest in the middle of a very tough Big Ten slate. San Jose State, Fresno State, and Louisiana are the non-conference games. USC travels to Rutgers to open up Big Ten play before hosting Washington, well, Oregon first and then Washington, before traveling to Penn State. Off their first bye, they travel to Wisconsin and host Ohio State, and off their second bye, they travel to Indiana, host Maryland, and play at UCLA. It is a schedule much like Michigan's, where Michigan's schedule features the 3 best teams in the Big Ten, and they also feature a game against Rutgers on the road. Michigan has to travel to Minnesota. USC has to travel to Wisconsin. Both have to play UCLA, and USC gets a game at home against Maryland that could be tough if they let it sneak up on them. Michigan has something similar in, I would say, Michigan State. At Penn State's going to be tough, especially given Riley's history on the road, and Washington at home is a game they can't overlook either. After the Oregon game, but before the road trip to Penn State, it is a very tough schedule. It is. The one good grace about this schedule is enough of the road teams and a home team in Maryland are pedestrian enough where USC, solely based on returning production, should have a lot of games in which they are heavy favorites in and don't really have a risk at losing. And they get 2 of the big 3 at home, Ohio State and Oregon. They get those teams at home. And Ohio State has to travel multiple time zones over. Oregon is replacing its offensive line. Indiana is replacing a lot of NFL production given its recent history, though they're on the road, so given how good they're likely to be combined with Riley's history on the road, that might be the one quote-unquote auto loss they have, if they are going to have one. When I look at this schedule, 9-3 could get you in, especially if you beat one of the big three and say lose to a Washington or lose to a Penn State, preferably earlier in the season, or maybe Wisconsin takes advantage of its easy schedule and you lose to them but beat Ohio State, and Wisconsin's like 9-3 as well, but with a much easier schedule and you have the big win over Ohio State. I don't know. Could get you in. You really, though, given the current state of college football, the college football playoff, you got to go 10-2 to be guaranteed in and competing for a championship. This roster has that potential. Jade Mayava is a quarterback who, look, I understand that he doesn't have the highest upside in the world, but he's in year 2 of a Lincoln Riley offense, and he was very damn good last year. I'd expect him to improve a bit. Wayman Jordan, and behind him, King Miller. That is a lethal running back duo. Terrell Anderson, Tanu Kynes, Zacharias Williams, Caden Dixon, Wyatt, and then one of their other receivers who is doing really well in the spring. Name escapes me very quickly, but I'm looking it up. Yeah, Trent Mosley, Corey Sims, Ethan Feaster. It's a very talented receiver room, very young receiver room outside of Anderson, but very talented. I'm curious to see how that pans out, as I love Dennis Simmons and think he's one of the best wide receiver coaches in college football. Mark Bowman is a freak. Write this down. Mark Bowman is going to be a freshman All-American, and he might even contend for being a normal, high honors All-American, like second or first team Big Ten caliber guy at tight end. He's going to be really freaking good this year. There's a reason USC is paying him a boatload of money. The O-line is Elijah Page, Tobias Raymond, Killian O'Connor, Lonnie Noah, Justin Taunu. Behind them, Elijah Viacona, Kenye Pepe, Kaylon Miller, Hayden Treader. They have talent, and they had that really good recruiting class, like Kenye Pepe. He could come in and start immediately, given some of the struggles the starters have had. There's definitely going to be competition in this room, particularly, I would say, at the tackle and guard spot. Killian O'Connor is a good center, and he has locked that down and deserves that. Defensively, the most talented group on this team outside of... No, this is the most talent in terms of raw talent, outside of maybe receiver. It's the D-line. Braylon Shelby, Alex Van Sumeren, Jade Abasari, Cameron Crawford. Behind them, Luke Wafel, Zariah Fisher, Jakeem Stewart, Jamal Jarrett, Jaden Ramos. It's a talented unit. It's a big, appropriately sized unit. USC's linebackers, their defensive backs, in my opinion, are not yet Big Ten caliber in terms of athleticism and potential. Their defensive line is. Linebackers are going to be Devin Bryan and Desmond Steffens. The corners I like in Marcellus Williams, Jontez Williams, and Alex Graham. Kennedy Oleracker and Christian Pierce, I think, can be good. I just need to see it a little bit because of how highly impactful Kamari Ramsey was. And their secondary last year, outside of their 2 starting corners, one of them being Williams, who I thought was pretty good for a young player. Just the defensive backfield wasn't super great. It's why they gave up a lot of explosive runs. The D-line could occasionally do something on its own. However, the D-line also lacked in discipline and wasn't playing to its talent level, and the linebacker group was just an abject disaster for USC last season. They had very poor linebacker play. But the talent's there. It's there. And for the offense, we don't have to talk about it that long, because outside of maybe what they'll do at tight end, where I don't think they have a lot of depth, but I think Bowman is going to be a really good player and likely will be a freshman All-American and play well. And what's the situation on the offensive line? I trust USC at quarterback, wide receiver, and running back. They're going to be great there. And with their scheme and their production potential at other positions, the O-line is going to have weak links, not true weaknesses. I expect them to improve on turnovers. I expect them to do better in the red zone, to have a more consistent offense on the road, given their experience. And I expect them to be stronger, older, faster, deeper, just a better USC offense than what we had last year, which wasn't a paper tiger. It was lethal, but at times in big games against strong defenses on the road, like Oregon's, Notre Dame's, and not even at all Nebraska's, but they still struggled against them. Even Iowa, who was actually a really high caliber defense at home, they struggled a bit against. I think this season they will be an improved version of last season's offense. Defensively, this is where I have questions. I view it a lot like Michigan's defense in terms of personnel. My issue is Michigan, at least in the past 5 seasons, has had good deep defensive play. They've never had worse than above average defensive play, and they've had some elite defensive play and elite discipline instilled. If USC has a good defense this year, it's the first time since maybe the 2016 season, or I mean, even then they beat Penn State by giving up 50 points. And they had some other bad games that year. If they have a really good defense this year, I mean, when is the last time USC would have had a good defense where I could say this is USC's best defense since 2000 blank blank? Like, fill in the blank for me. They've not had good defense in a long time. And their defensive line, it's really damn good. But will it play together? Will it play within the defense? Will it play to its potential? Will it be enough given the concerns that I have at linebacker, the concerns I have at safety? And I'm not one to say that this special teams unit is, I think it's going to be great, but I don't know if it's going to be phenomenal or not. And they might need it to be phenomenal in some of these bigger games. Oregon and Ohio State should improve on special teams. Indiana will have fantastic special teams. You look at, I guess you would say, even a game like Wisconsin or Penn State or Washington or UCLA, and being a little bit off kilter discipline-wise against some of those mobile QBs and good offenses or games on the road, that can cost you a win. And USC can't afford any losses, really, outside of losses to the big teams. And if they lose an upset game, they have to make up that with a win over one of the big teams on their schedule. The biggest thing here is just tackling, and being able to plug holes up front, because they were wholly incapable of doing that last year. But I love D-tackle, D-end, and the cornerback position. This staff is a bit underrated in my opinion as well. Riley's stock has been sold by quite a few people over the past few seasons, and the Gary Patterson hire, I was initially scratching my head. I think a lot of people were initially scratching their head, and I don't see a lot of people expect it to work out super well. I do not believe Patterson will come in and immediately the defense will be top 10, but I believe he'll come in and it will be top 30 or top 25, somewhere around there, with the upgraded talent profile, with the experience, and the fact that he's enough of a defensive savant where he invented his own scheme. Like, he was the inventor, the creator of the 4-2-5 mint, like one of the forefathers, the founding fathers of that defense. A defense that the base 4-2-5 is everyone's base defense now, pretty much, or very close to it. And like even Georgia running a 3-4, but with 4-2-5 players and personnel. So it's fascinating to see people not talk about that a whole lot. Again, I don't expect the defense to be the strength of the team all of a sudden, but especially with his quarters coverage and the strength they have up front on the D-line, they should improve in run defense by quite a bit, and they should do a better job of limiting some explosive plays and matching up well with a lot of the passing attacks that they play, at least in terms of, plugging holes and being able to lay some sandbags and create a dam instead of just letting the floodgates open every time they play a great offense. I have USC rated 10th behind 3 teams they play in the regular season. If they were to play Notre Dame, and I do wish they would play Notre Dame, they'd get them at home. This might be the toughest schedule in college football. They would play 4 of my top 6 teams, and team number 6 in Notre Dame has a decent edge over team 7 in Texas Tech. And then after 7 and 8, you get another sizable drop-off to 9 and 10, which is where USC is. Like, exchanging that game out for a week 0 game and getting an extra bye, I hate it, but I understand the strategy of it, especially if you're USC. Like, it was the fault of both sides, but in an era where Notre Dame went 10-2 last year and missed the CFP, and their schedule's super easy this year, and they'd have to travel to a reloaded and probably improved USC team this year, and in a world where USC is trying to compete for championships and they might have the toughest schedule, and they have not yet won 10 games in the regular season under Riley in the Big Ten, despite not having a schedule this tough, they'd be staring down the barrel of possibly 8-4 or 7-5 with Notre Dame on the schedule. Could also stare down the barrel of 9-3 or even 10-2 if everything pans out and Notre Dame was on it. But now that USC, I don't know, they basically have an additional free win here, that's going to change perspective. My perspective on USC wouldn't change if they were 8-4 with the Notre Dame game versus 9-3 without it. I'd view those teams as exactly the same, pretty much. But that's not how college football works anymore with the committee. And at the end of the day, regardless of that, this team, the wins and losses aren't going to be determined by who and who isn't on the schedule. To a certain degree, yes, but there are so many wins on this schedule that if 2024 USC plays, they're 6-6 or even 5-7. If last year's USC team plays, they're probably 7-5, maybe 8-4. If this season's USC team plays and most things go right, not all things, because it's pretty unrealistic, but most things go right, they could be 9-3 or 10-2 with this schedule. They have a great staff, a great coach who possibly is a future in the NFL. My question for them is really offensive line outside of center, linebacker, and depth on offense and defense, where I think the depth's improved from where it was last year, but depth was a major issue for USC last year, more than a lot of Big Ten teams. They were thin, like thin for a Big Ten team. They were one of the thinnest Big Ten teams in terms of like wins above replacement ranking for players. When their starters went down, you felt it more if you were a USC fan than a fan for other college football and Big Ten teams. You don't fix that in one season. They're going to be much deeper than they were last year with how much they bring in and how much they bring back. But that's still a concern with this caliber of a schedule, especially as they start to get towards the end. I believe USC is a 9-3 fringe college football playoff contender type team. I have the Trojans beating their 3 non-conference opponents, Rutgers, Washington, Penn State, Wisconsin, Maryland, and UCLA, losing, though, to Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana. This schedule is very tricky because there is a part of me that wants to, in a few weeks when I re-release my conference predictions, my top 25, do the final round, I'm really tempted to pick one of Penn State or Wisconsin as a loss and pick one of Oregon or Ohio State as a win. I'm very tempted to do that. I believe ultimately that Indiana is pretty much an automatic loss. It's on the road. Indiana gets a bye along with USC there, and it's the worst matchup that USC could face because Indiana's the most disciplined team and profiles out of Ohio State and Oregon to have along, like, simply put, Indiana or Oregon will have the best defense in the Big Ten. Indiana's way more disciplined than Oregon. It's a road game, and there isn't a rivalry aspect to it. So USC, by that point in the season, will probably struggle to get juice for that game because they'll have to already have allocated it to Oregon, Washington, Penn State, even Wisconsin and Ohio State. And Indiana has an easier schedule, and because they're so disciplined, they can pretty much get juiced for every game, at least psychologically. Like, in terms of strength, in terms of depth, we saw last year, like Penn State, even the first part of the Michigan State and UCLA games and the Wisconsin game, they had some issues, but they still pulled away comfortably. And mentally, they were there. They were physically banged up, as every team gets. And with USC, I have concerns about that Indiana game. This is in part with J.D. Pickell picking USC to go 10-2 and beating Indiana, but losing to Ohio State and Oregon. USC's ceiling is 11-1. There is a world where they beat both Oregon and OSU. They're not beating Indiana with where it is on the schedule, with where it is on the road, and the matchup that IU will present. IU runs a somewhat basic RPO offense. They run a multiple defense that's very diverse, but they're extremely disciplined, and you won't out-tough them. Like, no one out-toughs Indiana. When Notre Dame and Ohio State blew out Indiana, it's not because they out-toughed them. They just straight up beat them because they were more talented and their players made less mistakes, in case the Ohio State game where IU's special teams were a disaster. 11-1's the ceiling. I think the floor is 6-6 due to the travel concerns that I and many others would have about USC. Most likely records 8-4, followed probably by 9-3, and I would think that 10-2 is even more likely than 7-5 here. Getting Ohio State at home with the travel's huge. I have that game as a pick'em for either side, so it's a coin flip. Oregon at home is big, and look, Wisconsin, Penn State, Washington, Rutgers, Maryland, UCLA. You should take care of those teams, at least all but maybe one of them if you're USC at this point. 9-3 is my prediction. I think 9-3 would be a successful season or very close to it for USC. Room to have a few more losses or a few more wins, though. If I do change, as I mentioned earlier, my schedule prediction for this team, I probably would trade out one of Oregon or Ohio State for a win and one of Washington, Penn State, or Wisconsin in between those two big games as a loss. It's a very tricky schedule. I believe that USC, with what they bring back and what they bring in, is just going to be good enough to overcome much of that schedule, and they're a top 10 caliber team this year. Top 10 caliber, wonderful, college football playoff contender. I should have mentioned it in that video, but next week I will have a series about some of these teams. I do believe that one of USC or Michigan will likely finish the season, not in the college football playoff, because I don't know if either of them will make the playoff, but by November, they will be talked about from a power rating and modeling sense as a national title contender if they're just able to get in, really. So that's going to be really interesting. But now I want to answer some questions about college football and ask a question about college football. What if Curt Cignetti and the Indiana Hoosiers do it again? They go back-to-back and win 2 national championships in a row. Indiana football already shocked the sport by reaching the top of college football. But what would another championship mean for the future of the sport if Indiana does it again? An Indiana repeat would impact recruiting, coaching. It would impact perception of how to win a championship, perception of the conferences, and perception of what is possible in college football, and the perception of who the best coaches are all time in the history of college football, the sport that we love. Last season, Indiana already made history. They already did. They won it all with the 72nd team talent composite, with an 8% blue chip ratio. Less than 1 out of every 10 of their players was a 4-star or 5-star. And yet we saw them hose, destroy, annihilate, bombard Alabama, who had close to 80% of their roster made up of 4- and 5-star players. We saw them do something similar, not quite as bad because of the turnovers of that game. Oregon did look much better in the Peach Bowl than Alabama did in the Rose Bowl, but Alabama played better in that game than they did even against Alabama, and they won by 34 points against an Oregon team that I have preseason power rated 1 entering 2026, that has the most NFL-esque, deepest, most talented roster in college football entering this fall. Look at the previous national champions. Even Michigan was closer to Ohio State and Georgia in blue chip ratio than Indiana was. And yet Indiana was the first team to go 16-0 ever. First team post-1900 to go 16-0. They were 5-2 against the AP top 10 in the first 2 years under Curt Cignetti. 5-0 last year. 4-0 against the FPI top 10. They already made history. They already made their mark. And what has been nothing short of hilarious is watching college football analysts, ESPN, Fox, it's watching small content creators, it's watching bloggers, listening to the whole sport, and they just kind of throw the papers up in the air. And they don't know what to do. And this is really a moment. This is a moment to enter the market. Indiana created a hole in the perception of the sport that allows new ideas, new innovations, and new voices to enter, and for old ones to be crowded out. It was a inception point. It was a fork in the road in the sport, because Indiana, my personal opinion is 5 years ago, they couldn't have done this. They couldn't have. They would have ran into 2021 Georgia, who would have been too deep and also too well coached to likely beat them on any given Saturday. They were well coached enough and talented enough and strong enough in their own right, where Indiana, with how the season played out, they would have had a shot to at least beat a lot of the previous national champions, but they would have been hefty underdogs, unlike where they were favored in all but 2 of their games this past season, and models picked them to cover against Ohio State and Oregon. That doesn't happen in most, if any, previous seasons. Indiana took advantage of an opening in the window. They wedged themselves in, and everyone tried to stop them, and they just couldn't do it. People couldn't process them winning it all. They didn't pick them to win it all, or they didn't pick them to have success in the postseason or in big games, even when it was obvious, based on their improvements from year 1 to year 2 under Cignetti, that they were. And now, you don't have 2021 Georgia anymore. You don't have 2024 Ohio State anymore. 2023 Michigan, 2022 Georgia. You might have them here or there, but they're going to happen less frequently. And those national championship teams are considered weak national champions when looking at the teams that came before them in 19 LSU, in 2020 Alabama. Some would even say 2018 Clemson is up with those teams. They're not the caliber of some of those Pete Carroll USC teams, or if they are, they're only of similar caliber, not better. They're not 2001 Miami. As the sport has changed, the tides have changed, how you win changes. The sport changing is not just a general cliche or statement, it's a fact. And that encompasses multiple pieces and moving parts in the sport changing as well. And Indiana was the face of many of those changes. A new emphasis on coaching, on development, on scouting, an emphasis on managing your salary, an emphasis and the epitome of appropriately budgeting and using what you have to get the most out of what you can realistically get. Getting Fernando Mendoza out of the portal, Elijah Surratt, keeping Omar Cooper Jr., getting Pat Coogan, getting Stephen Daly, getting D'Angelo Pons, getting, Michael Kamara and Kellen Wyatt and Roman Hemby, for example. Riley Nowakowski wasn't even known at Wisconsin, didn't do close to anything at Wisconsin, then gets drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers and is going to play a role with them. An Indiana repeat, because if they're to repeat, they're going to perform at a level that they did last year, possibly a little bit worse, the same, possibly even better. And last season, they were so dominant. They were number 1 across the board, consensus, unanimously number 1 in power ratings. They were second in points per play margin. They were first in points per drive margin. They were 4th in success rate margin, 6th in EPA per play margin. And to do that again, what that would mean is 16-0 back-to-back, so 32-0 or 31-1 or 30-2 over 2 seasons. Add that onto the previous seasons, and you're looking at anywhere from 41 to 43 wins and 2 to 4 losses over a 3-year stretch, which means Indiana, with a team talent composite in the 70s and 60s, maybe this year they get into the 50s or even a little bit higher than that, but no higher than the 40th team talent composite, and no more than 20% of their roster, a fifth of their roster being made up of 4- and 5-star players, they would have won and lost as many games as Michigan did from 21 to 23 and as Georgia did from 21 to 23. If they simply repeat based on probability, they would have won and lost. They would have won more games and lost fewer games than Ohio State would have from 23 to 25, which from looking at NFL draft profiles is so far their peak under Ryan Day. Or maybe you extend that to 22 to 25. They would have a higher win percentage than that program, that team, that coach, one that is equivalent to Kirby Smart's Georgia, Jim Harbaugh's Michigan at its peak, and way better than Jim Harbaugh overall at Michigan. You'd be talking about a college football titan that has been born out of circumstances that was said for years was impossible to create a Titan out of. The sport's already been broken by Indiana winning a national championship, at least the upper echelon of the sport. Big media and like larger coaching staffs and larger programs have shifted their philosophies or have been made uncomfortable in their philosophies, have been demanded to do more than ever before after the public saw what Indiana did. Small programs are expected now more than ever to do more. And Indiana, they're just going to keep getting more talent. So I expect them to win a national title, if not multiple, under Curt Cignetti. I don't know how long he'll be there. I'd suspect no more than a decade given his age. But I would think they win one or two more national titles. I'd probably lean more towards two. It's hard to predict more than that given the era we're in college football. But what they've been able to do in developing talent, amassing talent, and they're only going to get more talented from here. And the way, again, they develop, that they call plays, that they game plan, it's a huge challenge to everyone in the sport, a massive challenge. And what this would do to college football is it would further move the sport away from the recruiting-centric view that it has had for decades, and understandably so. And it would move the sport even more towards being selective with coaches, and it would probably make the sport more impatient in the consensus. You would see teams that saw Indiana go from worst to the number one program, to winning 2 national titles in 3 years. And they would look at their coach, who's done more with less at their program, but hasn't done anywhere close to that, and they might think they can do better than that, even if they can't. You will see a more competitive recruiting landscape because, look, NIL has already made recruiting harder at the top. Ohio State, if they sign David Gabriel Georges, could finish with the number 1 quality class this season, and it probably will be a lower quality class in terms of average rank per recruit compared to a lot of their past Urban Meyer and Ryan Day classes. Like it is just harder to get that top-end beastly quality class, and the standards for getting that class are lower because it's more competitive. There was this post on social media saying, is recruiting an exclusive club? And they were saying only 8 programs have 2 or more 5 stars. And I'm like, that number used to be 5. Or it was no less than that. No, it was no more than 8 teams that had 2 or more. And there's not the same capability of building depth as there used to be. So Indiana doing this again would only accelerate those opinions that, yeah, we can't try to just stack and stack and stack talent. I think Georgia's experiencing this a bit, where now that you're not as deep, when you hemorrhage classes to the NFL, it's a bigger loss than it used to be, because now it's not just, oh, well, it's another crop of juniors that are going to be seniors, and if we evaluate it just as well, we'll completely reload. No, now you're losing like an unbalanced number of top-end players, and you're having to count on disproportionately good scouting to replace them. You do. It's why Alabama has struggled over the past few seasons. It's why even though Texas has never been better than it's been under Sark in the playoff era, they struggled to reload last year. It's what makes Georgia and Ohio State so exceptional. And even then last year, when they reloaded, Georgia wasn't better than they were in 23 or 22. They were slightly better than they were the year before, but not insane. And Ohio State was so much worse than they were the year before. Their schedule was just easier, and they were so good the year before that being significantly worse could still ensure that they were the number 1, number 2, or number 3 team in the country. This coaching staff is the best in America. So I look at Ohio State, Georgia, and Indiana as the top 3 staffs. They get benefit of the doubt when I pick teams to reload from a power ratings angle, from an NFL draft angle, as long as the production that they return somewhat is, the vast majority of it is quality, because you get instances where, you know, some players, even with the best staffs, just aren't going to be fantastic or elite at their position. But emphasizing coaching, emphasizing the portal, emphasizing development. These are not bad things at all. And this is more likely than people think. And this is why I wanted to make this video, to prepare people for what an Indiana repeat would do for the sport, what it could do for the sport. I use win totals at 10.5 and slightly juice to the over here. They have guaranteed wins in North Texas, Howard, Western Kentucky, Northwestern, and Rutgers before their first sort of test of the season at Nebraska, and that's closer to a guaranteed win than not. I just view Nebraska as better than the other opponents in the first 6 games. After that, Ohio State at home, that's going to be a huge test. Michigan on the road is going to be a test. Minnesota at home is pretty much a guaranteed win. Off the bye, USC could be a test, but I think that's closer. That's much more like the game at Nebraska due to the travel USC has to make and what USC and Indiana will probably be at that point at the end of the year. At Washington will be a big test. Purdue is pretty much an automatic win. You're looking at 8 automatic wins on this schedule and 2 games in 2 games in Nebraska and USC that are much closer to guaranteed wins than even coin flips. You're looking at a 9-3 floor here and a ceiling that is 12-0 again. And 12-0 going to the Big Ten, where they will be playing host as they're the closest to Indianapolis out of anyone, and they'll get a bye in the college football playoff. Extra time to rest, extra time to prepare, which Indiana will disproportionately benefit from more than anyone else because depth is not their strong suit, so getting healthier disproportionately benefits them, and they have the number 1 staff, so more time to prepare just helps. I mean, all these games, except for Ohio State, Michigan, and Washington, are going to be near guaranteed wins or absolutely guaranteed wins here. And taking some of my early numbers, like my own power ratings, early S&P Plus, FEI, FPI, 2025 efficiency, returning production, and some last year marginal stats. And by marginal, I mean EPA per play margin, points per play margin, yards per point margin. Indiana preseason, based off that and returning production, they're up there with Ohio State, who's number 1. They're number 2. Oregon is number 3. In my purely human input, based on a lot of research, but human input power ratings, IU is also second, only behind Oregon. Texas is at 3, Ohio State's at 4. They have a workable schedule. They have the best coaching staff. Their roster is better than it was last year, top to bottom. Top-end starters we'll see because of how much of an impact Mendoza was and the impact that many of those now NFL draft picks left, and we'll see if all of them can be replaced. It would do so much for the sport, and it would cause so much... It would cause so much chaos. I mean, it would be... What would happen if Indiana repeated is you would be looking not just at a historic run and a historic development of a program overnight and the rise of a G5 and FCS coach who's very successful, but just G5 and FCS at first. You would be looking at him rising into Hall of Fame caliber immediately. You'd be looking at this roster, the starting lineup that you see on the left-hand side of your screen. You'd be looking at multiple first-round picks if they repeat. They'll have one of their receivers between Becker and Marsh drafted first round. One of Jamari Sharp and A.J. Harris have the measurables and the potential where if they play to that potential, they could get picked first round. Carter Smith has previously received first-round luck. First round, not luck, but first round love. 2 L words, very different meanings. And I don't know, that they had players last year like Becker that emerged out of nowhere. Landino had a massive breakout season. Elijah Hardy isn't going to get picked first round, but he was phenomenal last season and is one of the more athletic linebackers in the country. Just isn't super tall and super big, but he's athletic. He's a freak in his own way. Had 8 sacks last season. You would have even more NFL talent off this team than last year's team, likely, if they repeat. And not only that, but you would have a team led by a coach who would start to be put in that top 5 all-time conversation. I'm dead serious when I say this. Curt Cignetti repeats next year, he's better than Urban Meyer. And like, it's not even close. Like you would, and Urban Meyer is an all-time Hall of Famer, has a higher winning percentage at Ohio State than Ryan Day, mostly due to facing easier competition, but still, it's very impressive what he did at Utah, Bowling Green, Florida, Ohio State. Cignetti, if he were to repeat this coming season, it would not be insane to start predicting, hey, this guy could win more titles and like be Saban when he retires, if they repeat this year. That is a massive if, though. Even if they do get better from a team quality angle, they could not repeat. They just couldn't. I mean, they played in 5 close games last year. They could have lost any of those games. They didn't, and they were coached well enough where they were never going to lose all of them. They were only going to only win half of them or win all of them or somewhere in between. They were not poorly coached enough to lose all of those games. But, yeah, I mean, you'd be looking at, again, Curt Cignetti's win-loss record at Indiana would at least be 41-4 if they go 14-2, or it would be 42-3 if he goes 15-1, or you would be looking at 43-2 over 3 seasons if he repeats. And those would be the records that he would get, along with even more wins against the top teams in FPI, an even better resume against the top 10 teams of the sport, the top coaches of the sport. Like, he would have to beat one of or many of Ryan Day, Kirby Smart, Marcus Freeman, Dan Lanning, Steve Sarkisian along the way. I mean, it would be centennial stuff. He would immediately be put in that top 5 all time and be a lock to be in top 10 all time as a head coach if Indiana were to repeat. And I don't know if the college football world is ready for that. If he were to do that, you'd be talking about him being unanimously number 1, and putting anyone else ahead of him would be insane if he repeats. Indiana would go from being maybe the worst program in the Big Ten 3 years ago to being the best program in the Big Ten. And what's even crazier is, due to how recruiting works, if they repeat, you'd start to look into the future where they're only going to get more talented after next year's team with that 2027 class and what they could be in 2028 recruiting-wise, and be thinking, are they just going to keep getting better? Like when are they not going to get better now if they do this? And not saying that would all happen, but it would be wild if Indiana were to repeat. It would be wild for the sport. I think it would be, I don't know if it would be good or bad for the sport. I mean, it'd be a good story for the sport. That's for sure. I'd be inclined to think that, given the emphasis on coaching and given the recognition that it would provide to a great coaching staff and how much recognition it would provide to the already historic turnaround, it probably would be good for the sport. But it would be crazy. It would be insane. The fallout would be absolutely massive. It would ramp up pressure on coaches, and you would be watching a coach who would be one of the greats all time, not yet surpassing Saban, but being like in that immediate tier below him in that top 5. You'd be watching that blossom before your very eyes, and you'd be watching possibly a dynasty form after I and many others told you that it wouldn't be possible. That's what will happen if Indiana repeats. Don't know if it will. As of right now, I'm not predicting it to, but it is very possible. I mean, there's a reason the sports books, even with the low team talent composite, and even with all they lost, there's a reason the sports books have them rated very highly. My friend Baldfather Betts at one point was considering putting Indiana 9-3, had them at one point 10-2, had them at one point power rated 10th, and probably still has them power rated 10th preseason, which was, pretty low compared to most people. And he, even he has sung the praises of their staff and said that this year they're probably going to be a playoff team, even picking them to be in the college football playoff in his first. And I know from talking to him that he'll probably have them in there again in his final bracket. You'll have to see where he has them. I encourage you to check out his channel if you haven't already. It's phenomenal stuff over there. Like, he beats the books and he wins money. So if you follow his every move, you too will win money. He's like the only betting person that I would ever promote on the channel, because he's not just in it for himself. He's in it for himself, of course. That's why you follow him, but he will show you how he does it, so you too can win and profit. Wouldn't advise it, though, unless you're viewing it as a hobby. It's never a good way to rely on income, and he would tell you that himself. But what's the root cause of Oregon's college football playoff losses? This is something that Yeah. I'm just replying to a few texts here. Sorry about this, guys. Just making plans with someone after this show. Okay. Perfect. Sorry about that again. I know you guys understand, though, but still don't like it when that stuff is interrupted. We have a Virginia Tech fan here, Jim from Blacksburg. I'm happy that you're in here. You wouldn't like what I have to say about James Franklin, but you would like to hear that I think I have you guys going, what, like 9-3 this year? Yeah, I think I have Virginia Tech at 9-3. So you wouldn't like what I have to say about Franklin, but you would probably like what I have to say about where I think your program will be in the ACC, even in year one. I don't think they'll immediately be ACC title contenders. Probably take a few years to get to that point, but they're on a good path, and Franklin should do well there. The Oregon football program is one of the best in college football under Dan Lanning, but the Ducks have fallen short when the stakes are the highest in the college football playoff. Let's break down the real reasons behind Oregon's college football playoff losses and what needs to change for Oregon to win a championship. Because I look at Oregon, Texas, and Notre Dame this year as the teams with national title or bust expectations from their fan bases, from probably internally too, to a certain degree from players and coaches. We'll see. This all starts 2 seasons ago. Really, if you wanted to take a look at it, you could go back to Washington in 2023, but that was Lanning's second year, and I think it's safe to say he's grown as a coach since then, and Oregon's in the Big Ten now. So when you want to find out the root cause of something, you have to go back to where it starts. You got to go back to the beginning. And I view 2024 as the beginning of Oregon's new look as a program. 22 and 23 were teams that were awesome offensively in the efficiency and explosiveness department. The defense kind of sucked in 2022. It was good in 2023, but how much of that was the weak schedule? Washington kind of tore them apart 2 times, and Washington was a good team, had a lot of NFL talent offensively, but wasn't, the best team in the world. They only beat ASU 15-7. Michigan held them to 13, though a lot of that was their elite defense. I just want to look at when Oregon joined the Big Ten until now. They won the Big Ten championship this year because they beat Ohio State 32-31. And they did it by having 2 takeaways to Ohio State's 0 and making a lot of big, impactful plays. Recovering that onside kick, recovering the fumble on Ohio State's side of the field. And at the end of the day, they escaped with a win, 32-31, in a game where Ohio State was the better team, but Oregon, being at home with the travel advantage and stealing away a few possessions, came out on top. In the rematch, I don't really blame Lanning for this, and I'll explain why. Oregon was held to negative 23 rushing yards. Really, they had like just 10 if you don't count sacks as rushing yards. And they lost 41-21 in a game where Ohio State led at 1.34-0. It was a bad performance, but Oregon that year overachieved. They finished on a poor note, yes, but they were never the number 1 team. Even power ratings, and I wish back then I listened to them a bit more, had Oregon entering that Rose Bowl, I think 7th, maybe 6th. S&P Plus had them higher, but I prefer FPI over S&P Plus. FPI is more accurate, and I think it along with its efficiency metric, which factors out priors and cares more about winning on a per-play basis than the final score. FPI and efficiency had Oregon, I believe, outside the top 3, outside the top 4. I know FPI did. Efficiency, I can't quite remember. But at the end of the season, they were only the 7th or 8th best team. They were not regarded very highly. And that's a credit to Dan Lanning. He overachieved with that team. They should have lost to Ohio State in the regular season. They should have lost to Penn State in the Big Ten championship game from a talent angle. But they won both of those games and won all of the other games on their schedule, in the regular season schedule. I don't blame Lanning a ton for this. At the same time, Oregon did come out slow. They did come out unprepared. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that before this season, and to a lesser degree last season, Lanning didn't yet have the players that he wanted to run the systems that he did, to win at the level that he did. And he's not going to become a gimmick, as some other coaches do, or institute gimmick schemes to try to compensate for that disadvantage that he had in this game, that he also had in the regular season game, and did institute some gimmicks, such as the onside kick, and that worked to his advantage. But there's only so much of that you can do. That's why rematches are very hard. Last season, they played Indiana in the regular season at home. And 2025 Oregon was significantly better than 2024 Oregon. Let's be real about that. 2025 Oregon actually had juice to win the national championship. They didn't, and we'll get to the reason why in a few seconds here. At the end of the day, they were more talented. They were younger. Yes, it's part of the reason they lost to this Indiana team at home while beating with an inferior team, Ohio State, beforehand. Because the 2024 team was older, they were more veteran, and I think that they kind of had a little bit more of an identity in a way. But they were not as good. They were not as talented. Indiana comes up to Autzen, wins 30-20. They handily outgained Oregon. They won the turnover battle. They dominated the first down battle, handily won time of possession. Oregon, as they did against Penn State, went for it a bunch on fourth down, but IU was able to set the tone enough in their favor to deter Oregon from making big plays offensively. They made one on defense, but were held to 3 of 14 on third down. Had back-to-back takeaways in the end of the fourth quarter to really seal it for Indiana. It was a close game. Indiana was the better team, though, very clearly in the end, and they won. And you enter the playoff and you think, okay, Indiana was much older. Indiana with Curt Cignetti probably is better coached. But Lanning's a damn good coach. Lanning has built a great program, and this team now has a lot more experience under its belt. So why can't we go into Atlanta and win and play Miami, who won the night before? Why can't we play them in the national title game? Well, you get to the rematch in the Peach Bowl, and you just can't turn the ball over and get dominated in the trenches the way that Oregon did. They surrendered 3 takeaways. They got a punt blocked, although that was in garbage time, really. They lost time of possession despite Indiana clearly toning themselves down in the second half. And Indiana from the jump outside of that first Oregon drive just owned them on the lines of scrimmage. They owned them pass rush-wise, but IU actually made the superior adjustments in the second round. They did an even better job limiting Oregon's ground attack. They did just as good of a job confusing Dante Moore, despite Oregon's passing attack never being healthier and probably being better at that point in the year than it was when they initially played Indiana. And they dominated Oregon's defense more than they did earlier in the season. Though some of that may have had to do with the fact that Lupoy was thinking a little bit too much about California and his job there. Same with Will Stein in Kentucky. That's where there's a lot of context surrounding this. We've talked about this for a few minutes, and that's really the first half of this video. I wanted to just review those games in the past because that's where this starts. That's why people are saying, oh, Oregon can't win the big games. They'll never win the big games. They're destined to always lose these games. That's why people have Oregon comfortably, in a consensus view, ranked behind Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas, Georgia, and, kind of in a brotherly way, and I say that awkwardly, Oregon and Indiana, despite facing each other 2 times, don't really hate each other. They kind of admire each other in a way. And they're, in my mind, 2 of the more underrated teams entering the country this year. It's understandable that people have sold some stock in Indiana because of the cliches and ancient wisdom of college football. A lot of it has to do with returning production and returning starters and 4 and 5 stars in your roster, and IU doesn't have a lot of that. So while I fault smarter people and like the analyst for selling stock on them as the preseason's gone on, I don't really fault the casual for that too much, except for when they say things like Indiana is a fluke. That's like saying Ohio State is lucky. Like, No, Ohio State creates their own luck by making amazing decisions, unlike you loser who's criticizing them for making amazing decisions. Oregon, I don't know why they're underrated. And my conclusion is people have just seen them finish the season in emasculating fashion so many times that they feel burned to pick them to do well again. A lot of intelligent people thought Oregon would win the Peach Bowl last year. Dead. Game starts, pick six. At that point, I kind of felt confident, okay, I picked Indiana to win, I picked Indiana to cover. I kind of think they'll do that here. Then Oregon responds, then Indiana responds, then Oregon fumbles, and I think, yeah, I'm nervous about being wrong. I'm probably not going to be wrong. And then the year before that, a lot of people picked Oregon to win, including myself, though I was not nearly as wise then as I was entering the Peach Bowl game last year. I learned a whole lot, in part because of that game and how humiliated I was that I didn't see the freight train that Ohio State was coming. I picked Ohio State correctly in all their playoff matches that run, except for that damn Rose Bowl. And I wish that I picked that, because with hindsight, it was pretty obvious what was going to happen, especially given that Oregon won that game. The root cause here is a variety of things. It's that Lanning took over a good program from Cristobal, but not an elite program. And he, in the same way that I think Lanning going to Oregon and Cristobal going to Miami was a situation where Cristobal leaving Miami benefited both sides. Oregon's much better now than they were under Cristobal and probably would have ever been. And Miami's probably going to win a title if Cristobal stays around for at least 10 or 15 years. They'll probably eventually win one with him. I also believe Lanning will win a title at Oregon, perhaps many. And a huge part of that has to do with how he's built this team. This team continues to trend upward, and on an average basis continues to win more games, continues to perform at a higher level. Simply put, I just don't believe that he has had the alignment to win these games against teams that won the national title. You have to be damn good to clearly and obviously say, well, if they just do this one thing better, they would have been the national champion, instead of the teams that were destroying everyone in the playoffs who won the national champion. Ohio State and Indiana, who only played one close game in the postseason. And for Ohio State, it was 3 other games, and for Indiana, it was 2 other games that were just absolute blowouts. And they weren't that close. They weren't even close in the second quarter or at halftime. Like, they were over at half. And yeah, Oregon was a part of those games being over at the half, but the reason Miami played Indiana close and Texas played it and Ohio State close, and Texas just had way better players than Oregon did that year. And the fact that yet Texas lost 3 times the games Oregon did with a similarly easy schedule tells you whose coaching job was more impressive. If Lanning had Texas's roster that season, like, they probably go 13-1. Maybe they keep it close with Ohio State in the rematch. Probably still lose, as Texas did, but they make it more respectable. Texas just had the better players that year, and the better coordinators, which Lanning has a chance to upgrade on coordinator with his 2 leaving for Kentucky and Cal. Last season, they were much closer in caliber to Indiana than they were the previous year to Ohio State, in large part because Oregon improved, but they were also very young. And that showed up in 2025, where I thought last year's Oregon team was more volatile than the 2024 team. The 2024 team, you knew what you would get at the end of the year. They were not high ceiling, but their floor was pretty high because they were experienced and old. Last year's team was inexperienced and young, but had all the upside in the world. And you saw that upside defensively against Texas Tech. You saw it with Dante Moore. You saw it before Penn State quit, when they were able to go on the road and hang 30 on what was at the time a top 10 defense in Penn State, and would have been if not for the team quitting and the injuries they sustained in that game. You saw some of the upside they showed, I would say, in their games against Washington or USC or even Iowa, where they played those teams close, or in the case of USC and Washington, won by double digits. And last year's team probably doesn't do that in those situations, given the opponents they were playing. But you also had games against Wisconsin where they had to they had to play a basic playbook and only won by 14 against an awful Wisconsin team. You saw against Rutgers the ceiling, but you saw the floor and the inconsistency of the offensive line a bit against Texas Tech or in the big games that they played. This season, I can't really provide nearly many excuses, or as many as I might want to, and I don't really think that they're excuses. Marcus Freeman's been blown out in big games before. Just watch that national title game against Ohio State. They were lucky to come back. You can't say that Marcus Freeman was an infinitely better coach than Lanning that season when Oregon went 13-1, Notre Dame went 14-2. Both got hosed by Ohio State. Notre Dame just got it was a lucky turnover too. Ibuka doesn't fumble. He's an NFL receiver. Getting him to fumble is luck. It's effort by Notre Dame, yeah, but it was luck by an NFL player just happening to fumble in that game. And Oregon didn't lose to no NIU. Oregon made the playoff last year. Notre Dame didn't. Texas missed the playoff last year. Oregon didn't. Oregon is closer to an Ohio State or Georgia under Day or Smart than either Notre Dame or Texas are, because they don't screw up against the inferior teams like those teams have. What happened with Smart and Day is, as they were learning as coaches, they would get depantsed by these teams that matched up really well with them or were just better. And eventually, after getting depantsed by Alabama and depantsed by Michigan, Day played Georgia close. He played Michigan close, but couldn't break through. And then he broke through, and he realized he was always capable of breaking through. He just had to build it his way and get his moment, as the story of the hero often goes. And Kirby Smart, the same thing, kept getting aced. He got aced by Alabama and LSU back-to-back in the regular season in 17 and 18. He kept choking to Alabama. He got blown out by Alabama twice in 20 and 21, and then blew out Michigan, and then beat Alabama in a competitive game, and all of a sudden, he could do it. It also hasn't helped that Oregon offensively, don't get me wrong, they are physical, but the style of offense they run very much relies on discipline and very much relies on, taking advantage of your athlete gaining separation, or you having better players, or you having a clutch player and good chemistry to win a one-on-one matchup or win a contested matchup. Oregon's scheme, from my perspective, is not a type of scheme where the offensive system they run is going to out-scheme a lot of defensive systems they will face. It's very much predicated on, if the offense is beating an opposing defense, it's because of discipline and or talent. It's not because they're scheming guys open a lot of the time, I think. I think that was a complaint with Will Stein, and sure, that can be a criticism, but some of the best offenses, such as Indiana's last year, were not predicated on, we're always out coaching, play call to play call your defense. They were out coaching you in the little things, their players are just more disciplined than yours. They knew when to throw the 50-50 ball. They ran their routes perfectly. And a young team, combined with a scheme that isn't exactly predicated on out coaching everyone, it's not the number one offensive scheme with the number one offensive play caller in the game, those things can be combined a disadvantage in games against an elite defense like Ohio State's or Indiana's. This offense with Maringer has some questions at the play caller spot, but they're older. Oregon has good position coaches and coordinators, so they're going to be more disciplined. This is going to be a better big game offense than what we had last year, which I would argue was a better big game offense than the one that Oregon had the year before. They just had very favorable things go on against Ohio State the first time around, a really good scheme. They took risks that mostly went in their favor, and they won. The defense was Lanning's best at Oregon so far, and I believe they're getting an upgrade with Hampton coming in to replace Lupoy. So defensively, I believe Lupoy has been a root cause of some of these issues, some of these college football playoff woes. Lupoy has never been known to be a great play caller. Why did Nick Saban kick him out to be the D-line coach at the Browns? Why did he unplug his headset mid-2018 and have golden call plays? Why, in these big games, has it been so much more so the defense's fault? Like, it's the defense that's getting depantsed. The offense last year against Indiana, honest to goodness, was the better side of the football, even with more injuries and it not being as deep as the defense or as experienced, not having the number of NFL talent there. And it was the better side of the ball. It was. Like, they had the one sustainable drive. They had an explosive play. The defense didn't do a damn thing outside of Nasir Wyatt taking advantage of an inexperienced right tackle for one drive. It didn't do anything. The year beforehand, Oregon was getting killed by Jim Knowles' defense in the rematch, which was expected. Knowles is an elite coordinator, so he'd make adjustments and do better in Game 2 neutral field than Game 1 on the road. The offense couldn't do anything, sure, but the offense wasn't that talented. Like, Dylan Gabriel is not an NFL QB. They were only really talented given the fact that they had some injuries at, like, wide receiver in that game. They were really only talented at tackle. And Ohio State's D-line and defense were so insane that they could somewhat neuter that. Defensively, Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell, Birch, and they had Betcher, and the defense couldn't get any stops early in that game. They couldn't get stops against Ohio State the first time they played them. It was the offense who won that game. In the regular season game against Indiana, they got the pick six. Yes, IU was still able to fairly often move the football, and I mean, I would say Oregon's defense was the better side of the ball in that matchup. Like, Oregon's defense really was good last season. But we have seen so many games where the defensive side of the ball is the one that at the end of the day gets depantsed. And if they just play closer, the best way to put it is in these big games, Oregon's offense is much closer to their scoring offense at the end of the box score than Oregon's defense is. And there are moments on defense where you see amazing players all of a sudden get depantsed by opposing offenses in a way that you think is, like, that's weird. And some of that's concerning because Lanning's a defensive guy, but Lupoy's the one calling the plays. Lupoy's the one running the defense. Lanning is very clearly tried to be a CEO who is a player gatherer, player developer, a hirer, a both figurehead and executive. Not someone who's trying to be an executive figurehead and be a play caller at the same time. I think Lupoy has been a root cause of some of these big losses. And when you do not have elite coordinators, which Lupoy certainly wasn't, I think Stein was great, but I will say that in these big games, the offense has also been with its faults too. Slow starts or occasionally getting completely dominated, though some of that, in the case of the Rose Bowl and even to a certain degree last year, could be personnel related. That's a disadvantage in rematches. In rematches, especially when Ohio State and Indiana had the superior staffs, the superior staff is going to learn more from the first game than the inferior staff. So with Oregon here, the root cause of these college football playoff woes, it's really been just Oregon and Dan Lanning have not had the personnel they needed to say they could field the better team, the better starting roster in these games. They were not better starting roster-wise than Indiana last year. Certainly not than Ohio State the year before. The Washington series is ultimately the most puzzling because they did have the better roster, unlike the last two rematch games. But DeBoer's also a damn good coach, and I think that Lanning was also clearly a younger coach, and I think he's clearly learned and evolved and gotten better since then. The guy's 48-8, guys. He's 48-8, and at the end of the day, I look at him and I look at what he's done and the staff that he's constructed, the players that he has coming back, the experience of this team, And this staff is going to be as good as last year's, if not better, due to some of the deficiencies of the prior coordinators and the fact that they're keeping the same schemes as last year. They're not changing schemes, which I believe is smart given where they're at in their cycle. And Lanning is only going to grow and evolve as a coach. He's had to face Cignetti and Day 4 times in the past 2 seasons. No other coach in America has had both the curse and the privilege of having to face that combined coaching acumen over the past 2 seasons. Outside of Steve Sarkisian at Texas, who's had to face Kirby Smart 3 times and Ryan Day twice. Like, Dan Lanning and Steve Sarkisian have had it in terms of facing these elite high-end coaches and teams. Lanning's done a better job in terms of straight-up wins and losses. He actually beat Ryan Day, beat one of those coaches, and while Sark has played those teams closer, he hasn't earned that win, and he's done a better job beating the teams that he should beat, in my opinion. That's the root cause of these college football playoff woes. You probably would have seen Texas or Notre Dame had they gotten in the playoff this year, and they had to face Indiana or face Ohio State with some of the matchup issues those games would have created for those two teams. You could have seen them completely blow it. Blowouts, even among two amazing teams, are not super uncommon in college football in the playoff setting. We've seen it before. Large part of it is just teams at that point, they're so good that if one of them's firing on all cylinders and the other isn't, one could very quickly pull away due to just how well coached they are, the talent they have, the togetherness they have. At the end of the day, Lanning is at fault for a good portion of this, but I also think that he has been building towards this season, and you can't ignore that Ryan Day and Kirby Smart and many of these other coaches have had equally humiliating losses, some even in the exact same context. Oregon this season, I have as my number 1 team in America. I do believe that they're very underrated preseason, and their college football playoff woes are likely to end this year, even if they do not win at all. Even if they do not get to hoist the national championship trophy, they're probably not going to get blown out in the college football playoff. I think this roster's too good to get blown out in the playoffs. That was a theme in both their rematches last season. They had the inferior starting roster. I don't know who has a superior starting roster to Oregon this year. And outside of Ohio State, Georgia, and Indiana, no other team is a definitively better staff than Oregon either. And Lanning and his assistants are among the best in the country. And I do believe that with especially Chris Hampton, you're likely to see an upgrade at the defensive coordinator spot. So I wouldn't worry about Oregon and their potential as much as a lot of people do. So many people I see tell me, Sam, don't buy into them. Why not? Why not? I remember when Ryan Day had Tuff Borland matched up on Jeremiah Smith. I remember when Cade McNamara and Michigan running backs who, like Corum was injured on a bad leg. Haskins hasn't done much in the NFL. I remember when that Michigan team destroyed Ohio State. Like that game on more days than not in those conditions is a 3-score win than a 2-score win, even with the success Ohio State had. I remember all of that. I remember Ryan Day hiring Kerry Combs. I remember Kirby Smart hiring James Coley to run his offense. Good coaches grow and evolve. They don't stay the same. And Lanning is a good coach. He will grow. He will evolve. And last thing I'll mention is last year's playoff loss to Indiana. It was bad. It was not the same rostering of the previous Ohio State loss, where Ohio State just had the better players. So even though the turnovers were even, Ohio State, if they simply put their foot on the gas for the entire second half, they win that game by 70. Like that's how bad that matchup was. The Indiana game last year, a lot of it, I think, had to do with the coordinators being distracted, with the outgoing transfers that Oregon had, and how young the team was. Indiana was better, but Indiana wins that game more 7 or 8 times out of 10, and most of the time they win it by just 2 scores, or maybe 17, like 3 scores, but not high 3 scores, rather than being ahead 42, what was it, like 42 to 7 at the half, rather than that. So they grew last year. It was turnovers, it was a drastically inferior staff, and a distracted staff that stopped them. Lanning loves his players. Lanning loves Oregon. Lanning's going to continue to grow and evolve. And this season, I don't think we should be looking we shouldn't be nitpicking the past to determine Oregon's future. That's particularly myopic. Very myopic. Well, we've been going so long, but you know what? I love it. I love that we've been spending time on all of this stuff. I'm going to take another break because I know it has been a while for all of you, and yet we still have consistent viewership. That's amazing. That is what we love here on College Football with Sam. So I will be right back. I'm going to get a drink of water. Make sure to like the stream if you haven't already. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Please do those things, and I will be right back in 5 minutes. All right, we are back. We are back. So what do we have here? 24, 32, 40, 48, 56. Okay. Okay. Well, we're probably going to be here for another hour, guys, and then we'll see you on Tuesday. So, again, if you haven't already, I'm going to continue to remind you, because I can, like the show. We're already at 37 likes. Let's get to 50 before we end the stream. Subscribe, like, hit the bell. Love you guys so much. Let's talk about some better or worse teams, looking at different rosters, trying to determine whether a team improves or regresses from 2025 into 2026. Taking a look at the LSU Tigers. LSU enters 2026 with high expectations in the SEC and some of the highest in college football. Already hearing talk of title or bust, college football playoff or bust, but it is Louisiana State University. The question is, will the Tigers improve or take a step back? This breakdown looks at LSU's roster, the LSU Tigers roster, Lane Kiffin's coaching staff, the 2026 schedule, and what LSU's football program can achieve in year one with Lane Kiffin, where it's hard to have one-year turnarounds, but Kiffin, with the transfers he's brought in, and LSU with the resources that they've provided, they have a right to have these high expectations. So let's see if they're going to live up to them or how likely they are to live up to them. LSU recruiting, even with struggles under Kelly, was able to maintain a standard of excellence. Every single season at LSU, Kelly was able to get either a top 10 class in On3 recruiting or a top 10 quality class, as last season's recruiting class was, bringing in freaks on different sides of the football. Last year's portal class on defense was even pretty good with Blake Baker. The offense just didn't pan out, so Kelly wasted a year of good defense, also wasted 2 years of elite offense. So it was just a mess. They needed a change. They retained Blake Baker, who was a good defensive coordinator, great defensive staff, 2 assistants that Lane Kiffin brought in or LSU kept from the previous regime, and Kiffin is an offensive wizard. So I look at the recruiting and some of the deficits LSU had the previous season, and I'm confident that they are going to improve. It's nothing's a guarantee, but I'm confident this team will be power rated higher than last season's team and also win more games, because you look at what LSU did last season. That defense was so good in EPA per play. It was so good in all the major metrics. The only reason it didn't finish higher in advanced analytics than it did is because when your coach gets fired, your team kind of checks out, at least a little bit. And you saw that. You also saw it with Auburn, too. Auburn's defense by the middle of the year was top 10. It didn't even finish top 20 in some sites because they, as Freeze got fired, I just think things unravel when your coach gets fired and you call in that team meeting, because you never expect that stuff in the preseason, especially in an era where it's year to year now. It's not tenure to tenure, if you get what I'm saying. It's not degree to degree, 4 years and then off to the NFL, or 5 years. It's now year to year. That offense was 128th in EPA per rush, 113th in EPA per play. They were bad. It was a war crime. I was never even high on Garrett Nussmeier. I didn't like him. Not personally, but as a player, I didn't like him. I always thought he was overrated. He even exceeded my expectations for how bad he would be, or how shocked people would be by his play. Turns out that it happens when you're injured and you don't have a good offensive line blocking for you, and your receivers kind of stink. That's not going to be a problem with Lane Kiffin, and pairing him with that defense that Baker had, even if it doesn't improve or even regresses slightly from last year's, but is in that top 15, top 20 range, could even be top 10 with what he did last year, you're looking at certainly a college football playoff contender, possibly even a national title contender. I love what LSU has, because solely based on returning production, new coaching moves, and the research that I've done, you're looking at LSU going from a fringe top 25 team at the end of last year, maybe even fringe top 30, to going to, I would say, a top 15 team. A team that isn't elite. We need to see them play some football before we call them elite, but they're going to be a playoff contender, especially with the schedule they have. They're going to be favored in probably all of their games except for the Texas game at home, I would reckon. So that's 11 out of 12 games. They're going to be a favorite there. They weren't that good last year, but FPI and S&P Plus have them preseason top 10. I have them 12th power ratings wise personally. They're 24th in preseason FEI, and they're 30th in returning production. But that's factoring in how much they have outgoing, along with the transfers coming in. And the transfers coming in are much higher quality than the players leaving either to the portal or to the NFL draft, or who have exhausted their eligibility. You look up and down this LSU roster, and you look at Jordan Seaton, you look at Sam Levitt, you look at Winston Watkins, Jackson Harris, Jace Brown, Trey Brown, Eugene Wilson III. You look at center Braylon Moore, who came back and was maybe the only bright spot on the offensive line. You look on defense, Dominic McKinley, Malik Blockton, Stefilin Green, Princewell Unman Malin, Whit Weeks in the secondary. This might be one of the most talented secondaries in college football. Deshaun Spears, DJ Pickett, PJ Woodland, none of them have ever been redshirted because that's how damn good they've been. And you got Tamarcus Cooley coming back with success. DJ Pickett is a 6'4" corner who's phenomenal. Like, that's a combo you don't get all the time. PJ Woodland is 5'11", 164, really good wiry player, 2 interceptions, 9 passes defended last year. And they bring in Ty Benefield and Fahim Delane. Fahim Delane was poised to have more playing time at Ohio State. Benefield did really well at safety at Boise State. And Boise State safeties coach who went to Michigan wanted to take him to Michigan. LSU got him instead. So, from my opinion, no doubt this team is going to be improved. Again, nothing is guaranteed. I wanted to go over it because not everyone knows that LSU is going to improve a whole lot, and everyone does deserve to know. That's the purpose of this channel. The purpose of this channel is to try to make you as informed as possible, and when we get things wrong, we suck it up, we own up to it, we apologize, When we get things right, we mention it, and maybe here and there we'll mention it again and again. But we want to provide research. We want to provide our findings here. And Lane Kiffin, I'm not as high on him as a lot of people are. A lot of people have him top 10. Some have him top 5, and I think having him top 5 is insane. It's like having James Franklin top 5. There's too many holes in his big game resume to have him top 5. Top 10 I can see an argument for, but I don't think the case is super strong. I have him around 15th. I probably place him lower than a lot of people do. But Brian Kelly was not all-time as a coach. Like, if you were not all-time, but Brian Kelly was not his peak at LSU. He was not acting like a top 15, top 10 head coach, let alone even top 20, as you should expect at Louisiana State University. So Kiffin, even though I am lower on him, is a definitive coaching upgrade over Kelly, if not solely for the fact that he will do things differently and more in line with what LSU needs. Charlie Weiss Jr., combined with Kiffin as play callers, massive upgrade over Joe Sloan, and they retained Blake Baker. So play calling went from like this to this, and head coach and CEO and scouting and development, all these things, that received a boost too. So you're looking at an upgrade here for sure. The question is, how does this translate on the schedule? LSU's schedule is Clemson, Louisiana State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, McNeese, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Auburn, Alabama, Texas, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Ole Miss, Kentucky, Auburn, Tennessee, and Arkansas are on the road. So not a very tough road slate, though Auburn and Tennessee could give LSU some issues. Texas, Alabama, Texas A&M, possibly even Clemson at home could be tough games. LSU's win total is at 8.5. I do view this as a 9-4, not 9-4, 8-4, 9-3, 10-2 team. That's kind of the range I'm seeing. They could go 12-0. I don't think they'll go worse than 8-4, but I think there are enough holes on this roster where 8-4 is more likely than 12-0. So let's name it 8-4 to 11-1, with 9-3, 10-2 being the most likely, is what I'm thinking here. Last season, LSU went 7-5 regular season. Like they were not good. So yes, it is a lock that LSU is going to improve from a ratings angle, from a college football playoff angle, from a wins-losses angle, from a coaching angle. They have a better quarterback in Sam Leavitt. They have a better receiver room. The offensive line has to get better, and even if it doesn't get much better, Kiffin's scheme, 2024 Ole Miss and last season's Ole Miss, basically all of his Ole Miss teams were the epitome of his scheme being good at scheming around an O-line disadvantage. He's good at that. Defensively, I like the D-line. Have some questions about linebackers with, I don't think Daugherty was really good, but Weeks is good. That secondary could be the best secondary in America. So they have the talent. They now have the coaching. They have the schedule. This team is, lock it in. They're a lock to do better than they did last year under Brian Kelly. I don't know if that means they're going to go over on their win total. They could go under, but even if they go under, it's likely going to still be a game better than it was last year, and their power rating will be higher. You can bookmark it. LSU is going to be better this season than they were last season. They're 9th in FPI and 10th in national title odds. That tells you something. And I know they were high, very high actually, in odds last year, which was, I thought, was stupid. We were, in the same way that we missed Ohio State's record, and that in this everyone missed, that Penn State and Clemson were going to actually suck. We aced that LSU would suck and that they were very overrated. I think I even said in the preseason that Brian Kelly would get fired in the middle of the year. And indeed he did, after Mike Oko and A&M carpet bombed them into submission. Let's now talk about Ohio State here. The Buckeyes, will they be better or will they be worse? Let me know in the live chat. Ohio State's football program will always be contending for national titles, and this Ohio State football team is no different. But replacing key players, specifically 4 top 11 picks, a second-round corner and D tackle who were instrumental to the defense's success, and handling championship expectations with an elite schedule, per my metrics the toughest in college football, is never easy. This video examines the Buckeyes roster, Ryan Day's coaching staff, and a schedule that features Texas, Indiana, Oregon, USC, and Michigan, and whether Ohio State will be better or worse in 2026 than they were in 2025. The Buckeyes are first. They lead the nation in preseason national title odds and in preseason FPI, a power ratings model, after a 12-0 season in 2025. Looking at Ohio State, this is the perfect model of consistency across the program. Even in their losses, they've lost 2 games every year for the past 5 years. But more impressively, because all of those wins are big, all of those losses are big losses, they have a plethora of big wins too. Ryan Day actually has a career winning record against the FPI top 10. You ought to know that, because the way some of y'all talk about him is like he's a bum, and he's not. 11-2, 11-2, 11-2, 14-2, 12-2. That's Ohio State over the past 5 seasons. Is an 11-2, 12-2, 13-1, potential to be 15-1, 16-0 with the new playoff program. They're that. They always recruit top 5, and if not overall, it's in quality for sure, top 5. They are always among the top of FPI. You know, Ryan Day has never had an Ohio State team that has been lower than 3rd in Football Power Index. It's never happened, ever. Like, not even Urban Meyer or Jim Tressel achieved that feat. All of his teams have been 3rd or higher in ESPN's FPI. Doesn't mean that will always be the case. That's probably unlikely. But it's impressive to do that through 8 years. That is the sign of an all-time head coach right there. And they lost a lot after 2024, and they were markedly worse last year than 2024, but they were still in position to repeat, in position to win the Big Ten, in position to make a deep playoff run, and were the most talented team in America. They were a wonderful passing offense, a great, good offense overall. They had some flaws. I don't think they were top 10, but they were top 15, arguably top 10. They arguably had the number 1 defense, and inarguably it was top 3, along with Texas Tech's, which allowed a similar points per play that Ohio State did while forcing more turnovers and sacks, but playing a slightly, well, no, not really. They really played a similar schedule. Ohio State was just more consistent. Texas Tech had more explosiveness, and Indiana's defense, which was phenomenal in its own right, helped them win the national championship. The only weakness for Ohio State last year that was really critical was special teams. That was the most critical weakness by a mile. Second place, also by a mile, was the offensive line. That's where you see Ohio State's EPA per rush was 75th, despite playing a schedule that was outside the top 20 even after their playoff games. The offensive line was pedestrian by Ohio State standards. Many programs across college football would have loved to have that O-line from a talent perspective, but fewer programs than beforehand because the inherent talent of that line was also noticeably worse than previous Ryan Day offensive lines. Entering 2026, you have the number 1 receiver in America, an argument for the number 1 QB, an argument for one of the best running backs in college football. The entire O-line is back with an offensive coordinator who knows O-line better than the previous play caller, better than any of the previous play callers outside of maybe Chip Kelly, who, look, the 2024 Ohio State O-line in the playoff, a lot of people say that unit dominated. When you watch the games, it really didn't. It just did well enough, and then on top of Chip Kelly and Ryan Day's schematics, they were able to minimize that weakness, which is a credit to that staff. That Ohio State won it all in 24 because they had the best roster, but also, more importantly, they had the best damn staff in college football. They had 2 elite college coordinators, they had an elite college coach, and they have that this year. Like Patricia, elite defensive coordinator. Arthur Smith, we have to see a little bit more before saying elite, but he succeeded in the NFL. There's no reason to say he can't be elite this year. And they still have Ryan Day. They still have Larry Johnson. They still have Mickey Marotti. They still have James Laurinaitis, Carlos Lachlan. It's a wonderful team. As I said to start out, Ohio State's always going to be competing for championships at both the Big Ten and national level. Every year under Ryan Day, they will always be competing for that. And last season, there was an argument that they were the best team in America. They were certainly the most talented. They were number 1 in EPA per play margin, number 1 in success rate margin, fourth in points per play margin, third in yards per point margin, and they were consensus second in power ratings. In FEI and game control, Oregon was second, and I get that because Ohio State didn't beat a top 10 team last year in FPI. Oregon kind of dominated a Texas Tech team that was probably similar to Texas in a lot of respects, but you're really looking at the consensus, if not close to unanimous, second best team in ratings last year, and in some other metrics they were first, and in talent they were clearly one. The amount of NFL picks that they produced and the way that they won games against the medium and bad teams just showed how talented they were. It was a very impressive reloading job. I'd grade last season's Ohio State team beating Michigan for the first time since 2019, reaching the Big Ten title game, winning 12 games. That was an A-level season. The final 2-game stretch prevented it from being A+, but that was an A-level season. It was a really good Ohio State team. It's going to be hard for this team to be better. And that's due to the fact that it's hard to be second in power ratings over and over again, though Ohio State has never been lower than third under Ryan Day. And when you go 12-0 in the regular season, it's hard to do better than that. It's impossible to do better than that in the regular season. If you're looking at total record, Ohio State can do better than that by simply winning it all. Even if they go 9-3 and sneak into the playoffs and then win it all, they'll have won more games and have had an obviously better season in terms of wins and losses than what they had in 2025. So it's fascinating. Looking at some early returns here, my power ratings, early S&P Plus, FEI, FPI, last season's efficiency, returning production, and some of the margin statistics that we just talked about, Ohio State's first in one of my very many power ratings. I have my human input power rating. This is a power rating that has some human input, but is very much based on priors, though not recruiting at all. Ohio State's first here. And that lines up with FPI, lines up with FanDuel, having them preseason number 1 in power ratings or in odds. I mean, I think if you use a model that doesn't have much human input and just has preseason priors, Ohio State would have to be number 1. They were number 2 last year across the board in power ratings. They were number 1 the year before that. In FPI, they were number 2 for much of the season, and they were probably anywhere from the second to fourth best team in 2023. I will forever defend that team would have beaten Georgia and Alabama, just as Michigan would have, and that Michigan was the only... It was Michigan and them in the game. They were winning it all no matter what, or most of the time. But that's not exactly inarguable. That's just my opinion. They were number 2 in 2022, and they were number 3 in 2021. That is a level of consistency in FPI and in efficiency that no program of the past 5 years has had. Not even Georgia, because over the past 2 seasons they've been 7th, and before then they were either 1st, 2nd, or 3rd in a lot of ways. And Georgia, before that Florida State game, was rated pretty low. Over the past 5 years, Ohio State has been the highest power-rated program. Georgia's probably still been the best because they have the additional national title and I think a better win-loss record, so they've achieved more. But from a power ratings angle, Ohio State has been number 1, so it would make sense in a prior model they'd also be number 1. That's crazy. I mean, given they were number 2 last year, if Ohio State's number 1 in power ratings this year, they'll be better. And if they're anything below second, they'll be worse. I, right now, having them at 4th, would probably say they're going to be a little bit worse in power ratings. Key reason being just the amount of talent they've hemorrhaged over the past 2 seasons, and I've seen what's happened with Georgia. With Georgia, they hemorrhaged talent a ton, and they got clearly worse in the same way Ohio State did last year. But Georgia went 15-0 after 14-1, despite being clearly worse. I think in large part because A, the Ohio State team they played was really banged up, and they didn't have to play Alabama twice. They avoided them entirely. So despite being worse, they had more wins and losses due to that context. Then they hemorrhaged talent again, entering 2023, got worse again, and the reason I would say Ohio State and Michigan would have beaten that team, Ohio State was finally figuring out rushing offense a little bit towards the end of the year. Michigan had a good enough rushing attack to average 4 yards per carry on anyone. Georgia that year defensively was not good up front by their standards. They were good, great nationally in football, but Ohio State and Michigan could have defended their defensive front well enough to move the football on them, and their defenses were good enough to force a Mike Bobo, Carson Beck offense, which I like Bobo and I like Beck. They weren't generational enough, though, to where they would have guaranteed hung 30 points on either of those defenses, let alone even 20 or like anything above lower 20s. Point being, Georgia got worse, and they got worse. And the only season where Georgia, I believe, has gotten better year over year was 24 to 25. From 21 to 22, 22 to 23, 23 to 24, they got worse definitively 3 seasons in a row. And that's what happens when you hemorrhage that much talent and you have some coordinator changes. Now, Georgia lost Monken and replaced him with Bobo. I don't think Ohio State with Day, outside of when Day was calling plays, has ever had an OC close to Monken. So they're not having the same downgrade at play caller that Georgia has had in parts. But Brian Hartline was a big part of that program. And Ohio State being overpowered at wide receiver has helped a whole lot when they've lacked in other areas. Think of last season with that O-line. If they don't have those elite receivers and they still have some of those rushing offense issues, that probably looks very different even with the easy schedule. I would probably go with Ohio State being power rated worse here, knowing that even with a staff that I believe is top 3 and from a play calling standpoint has improved. From a program angle, Hartline was so good and had such a good track record that was historic even by Ohio State standards that saying Cortez Hankton will walk in and be the same thing over a 10-year stretch is probably insane. You may not think it right now because Ohio State's program is amazing and Day does a good job of hiring people, but Hartline was that good. Like, his coaching was that good. He was that good. And losing that much first-round talent, I think yields probably a regression in the power ratings department. This doesn't mean anything, but Georgia, finally in 2024, and they had this actually in preseason FEI in 22, 23, 24, they were number 1. But really 24 and 23, those were the years where people finally gave Georgia their due, because they didn't rank them preseason number 1, 21, and 22. College football analysts and experts, and this includes me, though I try to do better about this. I try to not do this. We're behind at times with the trends. And when we finally catch up, we're behind again. And I think that Ohio State being preseason number 1 in some of these metrics could be an example of that, but I don't know that for sure. At the same time, what I will say is that Ohio State returns so much of its offense that the O-line, the QB, and the running backs are all guaranteed to improve. The question is just how much do they improve? And they still have Smith at wide receiver, so wide receiver is still going to be elite, and I think one of Brock Boyd or Chris Henry Jr. is going to be amazing this year. So you factor that in with a better play caller, defense probably gets worse, offense probably gets better, team power rating overall probably, I would say, gets worse, given there's not as much freak talent from what I know of. Because, hell, Ohio State reloaded last year in a way that I didn't expect. Georgia reloaded in 2022 in a way that I and others didn't expect. Special teams, though, gets better. And special teams isn't something that's often factored in a ton in power ratings because offense and defense are much important. But special teams could help an Ohio State team that I think is worse in power ratings have a better season because they win those close games. Or they are better, they're better able to get points if they fizzle out in the red zone instead of having to rely on Jaden Fielding, for example. Or they're power rated worse, but they have better play calling, so their players are put in a better position despite being less talented, and that's how they win it all. That happens. 2002 Ohio State was not Tressel's best team by power ratings. It was very far from it. But they won close games. They put themselves in the best position to win. and they had one of my favorite defensive coordinators and football minds of all time in Mark D'Antonio. Like, I don't know. I will sit here and tell you, looking at Ohio State's schedule, the 9.5 win total, and games against Texas, Iowa, Indiana, USC, Oregon, Nebraska, Michigan, even Northwestern with Chip Kelly and what they bring back. They could force Ohio State, like they won't beat Ohio State, but they could force Ohio State to play 3 or 3.5 quarters, and that's enough to cause an injury or prevent valuable playing time to be given to backups, and that could hurt. Maryland has talent. Illinois isn't going to be a pushover, though, again, those teams I mentioned will not beat Ohio State, but they can force Ohio State to get up for those games in a way that hurts their ability to get up for other games. We saw this with Georgia in 2024. I do think Ohio State's regular season win total is worse, and I do believe that power ratings wise they're worse. So the answer probably is they will be worse in 26 than they were in 25. But also, in this modern era today, what matters is the college football playoff. And going 0-2 against top 10 FPI teams last year means the room to improve against the top 10 this year is easy. You just need 1 or 2 wins against the FPI top 10 to say, hey, this team was better in big games than last year's team was. Now, the context of who those big games are is different, but the stat will bear that out. This is still a very talented team, so while I am saying Ohio State will get worse in 2026, I want to throw caution in saying that worse means going from second best to third best, or fourth best, or fifth best. This is a top 5 team. This is like a team that will be very good. And when they get into the playoffs and someone picks them to win it all, I will look at it and say, oh yeah, I can totally see that. They can say they have to go through like 4 games. Oh yeah, they could outcoach Dan Lanning. They could get pressure on Dante Moore. They could put Arch Manning in a blender, since they're rematching with them, and having NFL coaches in a rematch is a huge edge. They could punk Notre Dame secondary because they have one of the few receiver cores that can actually go up against that elite unit. They could, I don't know, they could run the ball well on, say, like Georgia, or more likely than not, because Georgia's rushing defense is insane. Maybe, oh yeah, they could run the ball against Texas, or they could run the ball against Miami. Like, stuff like that. It's an interesting conundrum here where I have Ohio State right now at 10-2, which is worse than 12-0, and I have them power rated 4th, which is worse than what they were last year at 2nd. But if the team is, say, in a stronger year than they were last year, maybe 4th is better than 2nd. Or maybe they have more losses than last year in the regular season or period, but they go further in the postseason. Ohio State's just different. So sometimes why I talk about them differently than other programs, same with Indiana's staff or same with Georgia's program, is when you're a good program, when you're at the top like Ohio State is, you get the different treatment. So I do think probably a little bit worse in both power rating and record, but then again, I don't know. If they lose 3 games, but they're the first 3-loss national champion, it won't matter if they're power rated lower, and it won't matter if they lose more games. They will have a better season in 2025. So I would caution some of the, like, unanimous opinion that Ohio State's the number 1 team, which I see with a lot of top 25s. I see it in all the power ratings. Power ratings I get due to the priors, and that Ohio State's been the second best or best team since 2021, and they've been the best in power ratings. But this is a team where, with its schedule, better or worse can get relative really quickly. And if they do lose a game in close fashion, or several, and everyone overreacts and they get into that playoff, this could be a team where you could buy stock when it's low and reap the benefits when the highs hit, because of their coaching staff and what they could do in the postseason, because they've shown us that they can dominate when it matters most. That was pretty long-winded. My apologies on all of that. Yeah, that was a long better or worse video. That was like a 20-minute better or worse video, and yet all of you are still on. Pretty phenomenal. Just seeing what people have to say. I mean, someone said they'll obviously be worse, and then there's like another comment that is saying, Oh, someone said that Cortez Hankton was as good as Hartline because of 2 months, like what, half a year of recruiting. Recruiting wasn't just why Hartline was amazing, guys. It was the fact that he developed so many first-round receivers with how he recruited. Like, Nick Saban's Alabama had 5 stars everywhere, and they did not have the hit rate that Hartline did at receiver. They didn't. So, like, it's funny. Ohio State is... You either love him or you hate him if you're a college football fan. And I'm weirdly in a position where I think I can talk about them objectively. Even if I'm wrong, it's still from an objective point of view. And it is what it is. Like, me saying that Hartline leaving means a downgrade at receiver, if Ohio State then upgrades at O-line, which they are in recruiting, then that doesn't matter that much. It just means their style of play is different. So, like, guys, there's ebbs and flows in football. Not everyone's going to keep getting better. Not everyone's going to keep getting worse. That's just what happens here. And I get frustrated when I shouldn't get frustrated. I should expect it from people, but that is just a reality here. Okay, I gotta be somewhere at 9:30, and originally it was 9, but then I pushed it back. We're almost at 3 hours. I'd say I'd probably gosh. I mean, the watch time is good, the views are good. We have more concurrent viewers than ever. I'm just trying to think, like, how much longer do I have? I mean, I have what? 16, 24, 32. I mean, we can let's try. I'll try to tighten things up now that we're on to either bold predictions or talking about some teams that I'm not as passionate about, who aren't as good. That's really what not as passionate about means. I'm passionate about the really good teams. Like Texas Tech. I've probably made too many Texas Tech videos relative to the views they provide me, same with Georgia and Texas, but they're good. So they're just they're so fun to talk about. But here's a bold prediction that all of you are going to love. Like, you all are going to love this bold prediction. Wait, hold on. I missed something here. Gosh. Why did I how did I miss that? I thought oh, come on. Yeah, I missed something here. Hold on. Let me... Oh. Nope, never mind. My apologies, guys. Hold on. Just one more minute, I would say. Just got to make sure this is right. The algorithm is important. Making sure that you guys understand, like, get off on the right foot is important. I could have swore. I could have swore that I wrote that down correctly. But I guess I did not. Oh well, I can't let it bother me too much. Anyway, bold predictions. One of my viewers' boldest predictions for the 2026 college football season is that Ohio State and Oregon could meet 3 different times. 3 times. Creating one of the biggest storylines and rivalries in college football. This would require Oregon and Ohio State, the Ducks and the Bucks, to meet during the regular season, which they do, the Big Ten Championship, and again in the college football playoff, potentially in the national championship game. Thank you to That Duck Knight. That's what his YouTube username is. Or maybe it's Discord. I forget where it comes from. Thank you for recommending this bold prediction, for posting it up here, because this is going to be a spicy one. on my 1 to 10 scale. And that's because it's hard for programs to meet up 3 times. But with Ohio State and Oregon, why not? Why not? After all, they're 2 of my top 3 programs in football right now. My top 3 programs entering this season, Ohio State 1, Indiana 2, most recent national champions, and I use a 2, maybe 2.5 year window to determine my programs, and Oregon's at 3. And my top 3 programs moving forward are IU 1, Oregon 2, Ohio State 3. And entering this year, and what I think the programs will look like over the next 2, they're like those crispy potatoes that you see on YouTube Shorts that people make and look really good. They're as separated from each other as the layers of those compressed, crispy, buttery fried potatoes. They're super close together. So it'd be so good for college football to see these teams play each other twice. 3 times would be absolutely insane. And what makes it bold in part is Ohio State's schedule. In order for this to happen 3 times, they have to meet in the Big Ten championship game. And Oregon's schedule we'll get to in a few seconds, but Ohio State's don't care about Ball State, Texas, or Kent State. Not really. We care a little bit about Texas because Ohio State also has to make the playoff. Same with Oregon to, have this prediction hit. And if they lose to Texas, they're behind the 8 ball there. But in conference, Ohio State is Illinois, Iowa, Maryland, Indiana, USC, Oregon, Northwestern, Nebraska, and Michigan. Nebraska, USC, Indiana, and Iowa are on the road. Same with Texas. Their win total's 9.5, juice to the over. Oregon, their schedule's a bit easier, but still it has its twists and turns. Boise State at home, at Oklahoma State, at USC, after a bye against Portland State. UCLA, Nebraska, at Illinois, Northwestern, at Ohio State, Michigan, at Michigan State, and Washington. The odds of both these teams making it to Indy is probably lower than either of them facing Indiana in Indy, and definitely lower than Oregon and Indiana playing in Indy since their win totals are at 10.5, and their Big Ten conference slates are easier than Ohio State's. It's tough. That is going to be tough for anyone. It's going to be tough for any matchup to make it to Indy this year. There is no matchup in Indianapolis this year that would have minus odds or odds that would even be in that plus 100 range. At least I think. There's one matchup that I probably would put in that range. That's because I'm more bullish on both those teams than the consensus is, and I would lose money if I had at a sports book. Like, I could maybe make money betting. Commanding a sports book and it requires several experts. It's why they win money. The odds of this happening already are pretty slim. Like, we're already above a 5 here for them to just face off again in the Big Ten championship, I think, around a 5. Like, it's bold. It's not scorching hot. It's not impossible or nigh impossible, but it's not a 1, which would be very close to, if not likely. You go a bit deeper, and factoring in these schedules, and factoring in what we're starting off with Ohio State, because Ohio State will be hosting Oregon. Ohio State's favored over Oregon right now in early lines. They're also favored over Oregon to win the Big Ten and win the national championship. Ohio State loses a lot on defense. They should still be excellent there, though, like top 10, maybe top 5. Won't be as good as they were last year. They should be better on offense. Better at running the ball. They should have a higher floor in passing due to the O-line improvements. Don't know if their ceiling will be as high due to Tate leaving, but they're also stacked at wide receiver, so their ceiling could be higher. The offense should definitely be top 10, if not top 5. Special teams with their kicker situation should improve, but special teams is a whole lot more than kicker. It's also punter, it's also tackling, it's also returns, which they haven't been good there either. A kicker is just the eyesore. So Ohio State here is either regressing a little bit, maybe more than a little bit, because of all they lost. They have 53 new players. They could regress by a decent chunk, but they'll, no matter what, be top. I would say they're a lock to be top 6. More likely than not, you can even move that up a slot and say they're more likely top 5 or top 4. They could also improve a little bit. They could also be the exact same. The average of those outcomes is probably they're the same or they're a tad bit worse, and the schedule's much tougher. And Ohio State last year made it to Indy, but with Oregon and Indiana also made it to Indy, and Ohio State, due to Penn State underperforming and them also being good, but their Big Ten schedule was pretty easy, they made it to Indy. Now you kind of have the inverse of that. Go from an easy Big Ten schedule to one of the toughest. If Ohio State makes it to Indy this year, they will be a lock to play in the semifinals. If not, and if not that, they'll be heavy favorites to do so. Like, I would view them as a lock, even if maybe they aren't. But if they reach the Big Ten with this schedule, they'll have a winning record against top 10 power-rated teams. Last year they were 0-2. They will have been able to win games in a variety of ways, using a variety of techniques, play calls, styles of winning. They'd probably be the most well-rounded team in the country, or close to that, like just below, if they simply play in Indy. That's how tough the schedule is. Duck from Action Network mentioned to me, he's a betting analyst and an elite one at that, was talking about how Ohio State, like, they struggled to shift into their fastball late in the season, and they had some issues in part because they went from not being challenged at all to being challenged within an inch of their life back-to-back against Indiana and Miami. Oregon's problem is that they did not have an elite defense like Ohio State did. An elite defense wins championships. So they have to parlay their talent into elite defensive success. I think they will, but that's not a guarantee. They do not have the coaching that Ohio State does. Offensively, they didn't have the same passing success. They were better at running the football, though. I would say by quite a bit. And they return a lot more than Ohio State and have an easier schedule. But they play Ohio State on the road. And all it takes is Ohio State beating them in Columbus, that's not unlikely. That's like, I can easily see that happening. And losing to USC on the road, or Michigan at home, or Washington, or losing to someone else. Or say Oregon's at 8-1, Indiana's at 8-1, Indiana lost to Washington, or not Washington. Well, yeah. Say Indiana lost to Washington and beat Ohio State, and Indiana beat Ohio State but lost. Indiana beat Ohio State, lost to Washington. Oregon lost to Ohio State and beat Washington. Or say it's a little bit, because Indiana and Oregon actually have a lot of common opponents, so then that would go down to combined opponent win percentage in conference play, which is really confusing. Got to add up all the wins and losses of your conference opponents in Big Ten play. At that point, that's kind of leaving it up to chance there. If Indiana and Oregon are tied and their wins against common opponents are similar, then even if Oregon and Ohio State are the two best teams, maybe Oregon gets left out for Indiana. It's Indiana-Ohio State rematch. So just that part of this is very bold. You look at the odds of them rematching in the national title or the college football playoff. Now they have to not only if they both have to make it, they both have to win out until they play each other. And that's going to be tough. It's going to be tough because one of them could be a freight train and be that team where you look at, and it's like, okay, no matter who they play, they're going to be favored and they'll probably win. The odds of these teams being 1-2 is low as is. The odds of both being enough of a freight train, though, or even if the weaker of them is the second best team and they're invincible to everyone else, but they're other, in this case, one of Ohio State or Oregon is the other of one of these two teams, that's even lower. The second best team last year was Ohio State, and they didn't even play in the semifinals. A lot of people thought it would be an Indiana-Ohio State rematch after that Big Ten title game. And it turned out that after the quarterfinals, you knew that wasn't going to happen, for example. And Oregon, Indiana, they got the rematch, absolutely. But they were dealt very favorable hands where Oregon was way better than Texas Tech, and Indiana was even better than Alabama than Oregon was against Tech. You're not guaranteed to have those type of layup paths to rematch. And you're also not guaranteed to make it to the playoff in the first place. I think Oregon's a playoff lock, and I think Ohio State's close to a playoff lock, but not quite, just a little bit below that. And the odds that one of these teams or both are freight trains where once they get into the playoff, they're only going to face off against each other is just oh so low. It's very, very, very low. I love both of these teams. I love both of their staffs. I think that Oregon is preseason number 1. Ohio State I have as a preseason top 3 staff and preseason top 4 team, also national title contender. So look, the odds of them playing 2 or 3 times is higher than it would be for a lot of teams. But at the end of the day, this is much closer to a 9 or 10 on the boldness scale than it is to even a 5 or a 6. Final note here, both these teams win, and they beat the teams that they should beat. So where the Duck Knight has a shot here, a very realistic shot, an inside shot, is Ryan Day's 82-12 and never loses games that he should lose. And there is a world where Ohio State is only in 2 games all season, or even 1 game. Also, more likely 2 or even 3. But even then, Day has above a 500 record against the FPI top 10, as does Kirby Smart. Dan Lanning and like Marcus Freeman are close to 500. Steve Sarkisian's like well below 500. So Lanning and Day like beat the teams they should beat. And as often as they lose, or in the case of Day, more often than not, they beat the top teams they play when they play a top 10 team. So if they are in the playoffs and the field isn't strong, like say Texas with Steve Sarkisian, you give based on their performance against the top teams and based on their game control metrics, you give Lanning and especially Day an edge over Sark there. You give Day certainly an edge over Freeman, and Lanning it's like a push. Maybe for me it would be a little bit of an edge, but that's like nitpicking a little bit there. You look at, what do you call it? You look at Indiana. Say Indiana, because I think Indiana has better coaching than these 2 teams. But what if Indiana just regresses so much roster-wise that can't stop them from losing more than 5 times out of 10 to both of these teams? What if Georgia doesn't take a big enough step? Because Georgia was worse than both of these teams last year, and they're still worse this year. There's a possibility of that. And you're getting to a point there where this prediction's highly unlikely, but is it impossible? Is it nigh impossible, given what we know about Day, given what we know about Lanning, who's 48-8, who has several wins against the top 10, both in power ratings and the ranking when at the time he played them? It's not impossible. So I am going to give this a I'm going to say it's nigh impossible, but not impossible. I'm going to give this a 10 on the boldness scale. And the reason I give it a 10 on the boldness scale is due to the fact that I do not think that their matchup in Indy is even the most likely combo. I think the most likely combo is Indiana and Oregon. And after that, I would probably, if I had to take one of Indiana or Oregon out, it would probably be Indiana-Ohio State would be the next most likely combo. So I think Oregon-Ohio State's the 3rd most likely combo to go to Indiana. I think Indiana, or to go to Indianapolis, because I believe Indiana has such an inside track that it's them and one of Oregon, Ohio State, and Indy. Even if Indiana is the 3rd best team in the Big Ten, their inside track to Indianapolis is easier than Oregon's and Ohio State's, and their coaching's good enough to maybe win some games where maybe they are the inferior team and there's only one game on the schedule where they'll be the inferior team. So Indiana creates a huge roadblock for that 3rd matchup here. And in the playoffs, I have both these teams making it right now, but the odds of both of them making it, while likely, are not, they're not, it's not a lock that both of these teams make it, and then they would have to win playoff games and not suffer an upset, or they'd have to be team number 1 and 2 to minimize the chance of an upset, because what if they run into a situation where they're an underdog? There's a chance both of these teams are, like, not the 2 best teams in America, and then that makes this prediction even harder. So I give it a 10. This person, the Duck Knight, if his prediction is correct, will get something from me. I have not decided what that thing will be. Maybe it's a t-shirt like this, like a professional college football with Sam merch. There's hats that I have. There's things on my merchandise store that I could purchase for you. You will get something if this prediction lands. Thank you. Thank you for shooting that prediction here. Next one is about the Nebraska Cornhuskers. One of the boldest predictions for the 2026 college football season from my viewers is that... Oh, wow. Yeah, I did. Wow. Okay. Hold on. One of my boldest predictions for the 2026 college football season is that... Not one of mine. One of the boldest predictions of the 2026 college football season from my viewers is that Nebraska will beat one of Indiana, Oregon, or Ohio State. Thank you to Crusader-TUGB9 for providing this prediction. This is wild because Nebraska's win total is 6.5, so they're not even guaranteed to beat all the other teams outside of Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State. And the Nebraska Cornhuskers, for now, have a decisive coaching disadvantage against the Indiana Hoosiers, the Oregon Ducks, and the Ohio State Buckeyes. Nebraska's football program it's better than it was under Scott Frost. It's better than it was under Mike Riley, but it's far from perfect. It is still recovering from the Frost era, and Rule is still learning as a head coach and adapting to this current era. I like Rob Orich, the DC, Dana Holgorsen, the OC. Matt Rule, I think, is a good CEO and has done a good job building the staff and admitting when he's made mistakes. But if Nebraska wants to do this, Crusader, and Nebraska fans watching who are optimistic, Rule is going to have to be such a better game manager that he would be night and day different from what he has been through 3 years with the Cornhuskers. I mean, it'd have to be a night and day difference. The win total is 6.5 for a reason, even though this is Rule's best roster with the Cornhuskers. And it is, by quite a significant bit, I would say, his best staff as well. This is also the toughest schedule that he has played. And last season's team that he has to rebound from is not all roses and sunshine. The end of the season was devastating. There's a reason that now this might change because it's July and we're getting closer to August, but like my Adam Carricker video is doing well, but my Nebraska content this year has not done the best. The fan base felt dead towards the end of last season with Raiola getting hurt, the defense just getting a cinder block dropped on its head almost every time it took the field in the month of November. I mean, their EPA per rush on defense is 126th. It's just... It's so bad. It was so bad that the passing defense began to suffer at the end of the season because opponents could just abuse the rushing attack to play that defense and put it in the position that the opponent wanted to be in. Case in point was Iowa, by the way. Nebraska's bright spot was special teams, and Mike Eckler leaves for USC. I don't think they'll regress a whole lot there, but they'll have to maintain their excellence in special teams. They'll have to get a hell of a lot better defending the run, because Indiana and Oregon will do that well. Ohio State will too with Arthur Smith. I think that Ohio State's rushing offense last year was a product of a variety of things, and I don't think all of those things are different, but I do believe it will be improved. Like, it was bad by Ryan Day, Ohio State, in just average standards. It was Ryan Day's worst rushing offense ever. So it'll be better than that. You're not going to see that continue to regress. Oregon had a somewhat up and down rushing offense that I imagine a good staff there will correct, and IU returns their entire O-line, and their whole scheme is predicated on running the ball, which is a bit different than Oregon and especially Ohio State, who can be pass first and be very good at it if they want to be. In Indiana and Oregon are going to have some of the best rushing offenses in the country, and Ohio State is going to be great. It's not just going to be above average or even FBS bad like it was last year. It's going to be a good, great rushing attack. Iowa's will be consistent too. So Nebraska, if they want to beat one of these teams, is going to have to be way better at stopping the run. Offensively, they're going to have to do a much better job at protecting the quarterback. And Calandra is going to have to cut down on turnovers because Matt Patricia will dial up defenses this year to force more turnovers. They didn't force many last year, and with the schedule they have, And the talent they have, it'll probably be a point of emphasis to improve on forcing turnovers. Indiana, they return most of their defense. Same with Oregon. They were top 5 last year. They were havoc monsters. I also imagine Ohio State, given the low havoc rate they had last year, to compensate for getting worse at many positions, they'll probably try to create more havoc plays, more turnovers, try to send more blitzes, be a bit more aggressive to compensate for a little bit of a drop-off in talent. Oregon and Indiana, they're going to get better probably from last year, at least from what my research says. Indiana might get a little bit worse offensively, especially in terms of the quarterback position. Oregon, I can't find a position where they get worse outside of maybe special teams with what they lose there. They're a team that reads a lot like 2024 Ohio State to me, where they're likely going to get better at the vast majority of positions. I like this Nebraska team. I think it's going to be scrappy. I think that it has a chance to win 8 games. 7 games is what I have them at right now. They could win just 6 or even go 5-7. They could also go 9-3. But I have a hard time seeing them go any better than 9-3. I mean, look at their performance sheet on offense last year. The only thing they were good at was not turning over the football, and some of that could be chalked up to Raiola being too conservative. The same reason he held onto the football too long, or the same reason that he took the sacks he did or didn't use his legs all that much. They were also good on third down conversion percentage, but keep in mind, they didn't play Oregon, Indiana, or Ohio State last year, and Penn State had a down year. Like, that schedule was easy, and they were a average FBS team. They weren't even a 10 last year. They weren't in FPI. I don't even think they were a 7. I think they were like a 5, a 6, or a 4 in FPI last year. Like, they weren't even a touchdown better than the average FBS team last year in power ratings. They would need to make a big jump, or one of IU, Oregon, or Ohio State would have to have a really bad day or implode for Nebraska to fulfill this prediction. So already we're well above a 5 here. Already. I would look at the defense, and the defense is where there's some hope here. It was very bad last season, but I expect it to be good this year. Orich has a track record. Adam Carrick will tell you this. Every single season, 9 years in a row, his defense has statistically gotten better, no matter his stop. Now, I don't know if that'll happen at Nebraska this year, because last year, San Diego State's defense was pretty damn good, even nationally. But even if it does not, that man's track record is crazy, and he's young. So he's continuing to grow, he's continuing to evolve, and Nebraska's defense was worse than its personnel last year. It truly was. So I do expect huge improvements there, particularly, I would say, in run defense, because it was so bad. The only Big Ten defense that was worse in defending the run was Rutgers, who gave up... Funny story about Rutgers. Rutgers' defense, rushing defense, was so bad that Ohio State only averaging 6 yards per carry on them told you Ohio State couldn't run the football. That's how bad Rutgers' run defense was. Nebraska's wasn't that far behind, where Penn State couldn't run the ball for stretches of the season. They could run a little bit in Ohio State and a little bit on Indiana. They had 5 decent plays against Ohio State that were medium runs. They had 1 big run against Indiana, and outside of that, they couldn't run the ball. They couldn't run against Oregon at all without using tons of motion, and without Aller's deep pass. They probably can't even play off of that. They couldn't run. They ran decently against Iowa, but Iowa's run defense was not its calling card. And they were able to jam it down Nebraska's throat. It was just they did Rutgers, literally. So Nebraska's better personnel than Rutgers. They made a better DC hire than Rutgers. They're more talented. They have a better program right now. So I'd expect Rutgers to improve a lot on defense because of how flukishly bad they were. Nebraska, that's even more of the case. And Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State last year all had issues on the offensive line. There's a chance that all of them could have some of those issues again. And Nebraska hosts Indiana, and they host Ohio State. So I look at the Cornhuskers here, and I think to myself, if they're going to catch any of these teams, how? And who'd be the most likely? Well, Indiana, they have to travel to Nebraska before facing Ohio State. So that could be a little bit of a trap game. Indiana in pass rush was excellent. Like in every aspect of defense, they were fantastic. Occasionally they gave up explosive plays, but when you are as zone heavy as they are, occasionally someone will get behind the zone or the zone play breaks down because the receivers, start running or they run at the end of their routes and they get more unpredictable. Like that happened a lot with Miami. Miami was able to pass block well enough that they could eventually find a hole in the zone towards the end of the game as they made adjustments. But that defense, though, I don't know how Nebraska's going to be able to move on them. And Indiana will be one of the few teams that will beat Nebraska in special teams, probably. And that rushing offense will improve. Is it going to improve enough to shut down Indiana's rushing offense? Especially with how much improvement IU has made at running the ball. I don't know. Like I don't really think so there. If Nebraska is to somehow play Indiana closer or get them there, it will be Williams-Nwaneri and this defensive front really improving and Hoover turning it over a bit against a secondary that I think is pretty good. But it's going to be, I think, nigh impossible to win this game. Oregon will be impossible. Indiana and Ohio State, due to Nebraska playing them at home, the great environment in Memorial Stadium, and Nebraska's improvements, and the fact that I think Oregon is the best roster of the three. Nebraska, there is a world where they beat one of Indiana or Ohio State, and everyone's like, has Curt Cignetti or Ryan Day lost it, and are they now jarring their urine, like in the post-game press conference? That's not happening with Oregon. It will help that Dylan Raiola isn't playing, but he has worked in Holgerson's offense, so he'll be able to give pointers, probably, since Holgerson won't change everything up. And since Raiola won't be playing, Oregon will have a bit of a knowledge edge that Nebraska won't have. It's on the road, and Oregon has the better players at literally every position. Like Oregon in Autzen against teams that are 2 or more time zones away and who are not quite at their level is a game where they will just house you, and it will be over within a quarter. If not, maybe it'll be a slugfest, but there's no way Oregon is losing this game. No way. No way, no way. Thankfully, only one of these games has to be a win for this prediction to be fulfilled. Ohio State is another one. The Buckeyes, when I look at their defense and offense, I have a very hard time seeing Nebraska beating them, just like I have a hard time seeing it with Indiana. But I also believe in looking at a variety of things that at the end of the day, there's more hope than against Oregon because they host Ohio State. And say Ohio State's rushing offense or offensive line's having some issues again, or maybe just in the Nebraska game they are, and you could see it being a bit more low scoring, and all you need is a big play or two from Calandria and an offense that has some big playmakers to make it competitive. At the end of the day, I think this opinion's very bold. I am going to give it a 9.5 on the boldness scale. Not quite a 10, because they have enough juice and they catch Ohio State and Indiana in enough look-ahead spots or sandwich games where there is a sliver of a chance they get one of them. Actually, I'm going to up it to a 9.75. It's not a 10 quite, but it's very close. You could round it up to a 10. Just Nebraska needs to do so much more before I can pick them to even play within 3 or 4 scores of these teams. Hold on, guys. I just got a call from someone. Just 1 second here. All right, guys. Well, this is where it's going to end. Glad I was able to get through a few of those bold predictions. What I left at the end of the video, I will be able to get out in the future, I would say. So, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, really good stream, really good show. Sorry for I keep going an hour longer than I want to, and I don't like I have my show organized, I have the time organized, the stopwatch. I think part of it's the heat, and when I get hot, I get distracted and I ramble. Also doesn't help that I'm my own producer. But that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. The show is only going to get better. These videos will be out in the next few days. Have a fantastic day. We'll see you all Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Love you guys so much. Have a great day.